the Admiral of Hogwarts. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 26 Sorting Ceremony. Hannah Abbott. Professor McGonagall called out the first name after glancing at the list. After all, the list was sorted by the first letter of the last name, and Hannah Abbott, whose last name started with A, was naturally listed first. Hugo watched as a rosy-cheeked little girl with 2 golden braids stumbled out of the line, put on the hat, which covered her eyes. She sat down. A moment of pause. Hufflepuff, the hat shouted, and the people at the table on the right applauded and cheered for Hannah, welcoming her to sit at their table. The Fat Fire Ghost also happily waved to her. Looking at the black and yellow house crests on the chests of each student at this table, Hugo could confirm that Hufflepuff was indeed the house with the most students in the school. Susan Bones, Hufflepuff, the hat shouted again. Susan quickly ran to Hannah's side and sat down. Terry Boot, Ravenclaw. This time, the second table on the left clapped and applauded. When Terry joined their ranks, several Ravenclaw students with blue badges on their chests stood up and shook his hand. Hugo Granger, after Seamus Finnegan sat on the stool for a full minute before being sorted into Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall called out Hugo's name. Fortunately, he had contacted Victory beforehand to confirm that the hat could not bypass or break the various protections set up by the ship girls in his mind to read those memories from within, so he walked to the sorting hat relatively calmly, and then carefully put the hat on his head. The reason he was so gentle was that after getting close to the hat, he realized that it was more dilapidated than he had imagined, and even had some fiber weathering on the surface that he had only seen on unearthed textiles in museums before. Little one, thank you for your concern, but you don't have to worry about the old hat falling apart. Although it couldn't read the memories in Hugo's mind, the sorting hat could still see a little of what he was thinking about when he put on the hat. I'm a hat that has been infused with the thoughts of the 4 founders. It won't be a problem to last another 1,000 years. After saying that, the hat began to mutter. Alright, let me take a look at your little brain and sort you into the right house. The old hat is best at this kind of thing. This feels a bit difficult. After a dozen seconds of silence, the sorting hat's voice sounded in Hugo's ear again. But this little bit of difficulty can't stump a clever hat. I know where to put you. After speaking, the sorting hat shouted its final choice loudly to the entire hall. Ravenclaw. After confirming which house he was going to, Hugo took off the hat, placed it on the stool, and bowed slightly to the hat. Then, after seeing the blue Ravenclaw badge appear on his chest, he walked to the Ravenclaw table and found an empty seat. He was quite satisfied with his sorting result. Although being sorted into Gryffindor would allow him to follow the protagonist and leech off the plot, Ravenclaw had its own library, which would make it easier for him to acquire more knowledge. And for wizards, knowledge is power. Having more power would be beneficial for him to participate in the plot and gain more destiny points for himself. The Ravenclaw upperclassmen weren't as aloof as Hugo had imagined. Perhaps because Ravenclaw had more girls before. Hugo noticed that several of the older girls seemed quite sincere when they applauded to welcome him. However, Hugo had only just managed to introduce his name when he saw that Hermione's sorting had also ended. But unexpectedly, she was also sorted into Ravenclaw. 10 destiny points. Victory's voice sounded in Hugo's mind again. Although we can only give you destiny points based on the current changes, the original heroine changing houses is still a major event that can bring you a lot of destiny points. Sister, did the sorting hat talk to you just now? After Hermione ran down from the platform and sat next to him, Hugo asked curiously. I just heard the hat tell me that it encountered a bit of difficulty when it was sorting me, and it took a long time to decide to sort me into Ravenclaw. Actually, me too. Hermione politely waved to the upperclassman who had greeted her earlier, then turned to Hugo and said, the hat was a little hesitant just now because it thought I was suitable for both Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. But because I told it that I wanted to be with you, it sorted me here in the end. In this year's freshmen, besides Hugo and his sister Hermione, there was also another pair of twin sisters, the Paddle twins. However, unlike Hugo and his sister, one of the Paddle sisters was sorted into Gryffindor, and the other was sorted into Ravenclaw in the following sorting. The sorting of the legendary savior Harry Potter attracted everyone's attention. And after he was finally sorted into Gryffindor, a burst of cheers erupted from the Gryffindor side after Harry. It was Firefly's turn. The hat almost screamed as soon as it touched her head. Gryffindor. Firefly took off the hat and smiled at Hugo, then ran to the Gryffindor table and found an empty seat. Hugo knew that Firefly had gotten her wish this time. After all, she had always liked Gryffindor. Even her ship equipment had a gold and red scarf representing Gryffindor, not to mention that for the brave and lively Firefly, Gryffindor was indeed the most suitable house for her out of the 4 houses of Hogwarts. She would definitely have a good time there. After her was a girl named Lisa Turpin. After a little thought, the sorting hat sorted her into Ravenclaw. Next, it was Venato's turn to be sorted. Whether it was her silver-white short hair or her ruby-like pupils, Venato attracted a lot of attention. Under everyone's gaze, she gracefully placed the sorting hat on her head. A dozen seconds later, the sorting hat shouted towards the hall, "Ravenclaw." Venato walked off the stage and quickly sat in the empty seat on Hugo's other side. At this time, there were only 2 people left waiting to be sorted. After Venato introduced herself, the sorting ceremony ended. Professor McGonagall rolled up the parchment, picked up the sorting hat, and left. At this time, Albus Dumbledore stood up. He looked at the students with a smile, and spread his arms to them, as if nothing made him happier than seeing the students gathered together. "Welcome," he said, "welcome everyone to Hogwarts to start a new school year. Before the feast begins, I would like to say a few words. They are, nitwit, blubber, augment, tweak. Thank you all." Professor Dumbledore's words represent a kind of prejudice that the 4 houses have in the eyes of others. He should be reminding us to often reflect on ourselves. A beautiful upperclassman with long brown curly hair looked at Hugo and the other first-year students and explained, "By the way, my name is Penelope Clearwater, and I'm a 4th-year student. Okay, I think you're all hungry, hurry up and eat." Hugo turned his head and realized that the previously empty gold plates were filled with all kinds of delicacies, such as roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausages, steaks, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, French fries, Yorkshire pudding, pea shoots, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint candies. The abundance of food enlivened the atmosphere all at once. And for most of the students, what they usually ate at home was not necessarily as rich as the opening feast. Therefore, the feast was very sumptuous for them. In such a pleasant atmosphere, most people ate more food than they usually did. When the last of the puddings had disappeared, Professor Dumbledore stood up again. The dining hall returned to silence. "Oh, now that everyone is full and has had their fill, I have a few more words to say to everyone. At the beginning of the term, I would like to bring a few things to everyone's attention." After announcing a bunch of things as a matter of routine, Professor Dumbledore led everyone to sing the school song and then lined up to leave the hall in order. Hugo was now very much looking forward to the Ravenclaw dormitory. After all, when people are full and have had their fill, they always want to find a comfortable place to have a good sleep. Chapter 27 Ravenclaw Tower. The first-year Ravenclaws followed a young man with short, golden hair through the noisy crowd, out of the dining hall, and up the marble staircase. This young man was Robert Hilliard, the Ravenclaw prefect. Hugo had misremembered something. He had always thought that Penelope Clearwater should be the prefect, but in reality, Penelope was only a 4th-year student now, so she would probably become a prefect next year. "Everyone must remember these moving staircases," Robert Hilliard said to the first-year students behind him as he climbed the stairs. "Because the castle is very large, it is easy to be late for class if you go the wrong way." There are a total of 142 staircases at Hogwarts. Some of them are wide and large, some are narrow and small, and shaky, some lead to different places every Friday, some disappear suddenly halfway up, and you have to remember where to jump over. In addition, there are many doors here. If you don't politely ask them to open, or poke the right spot, they won't open for you, and some doors are not real doors at all, just solid walls that look like doors. Just as the prefect finished instructing them and was leading the way, Hermione whispered to Hugo and Venato beside her about what she had read in the books before. Around them, many first-year students were also exchanging information about the castle, the school, Ravenclaw House, or the subjects they were going to study. From their discussions, Hugo also noticed that the students who were selected into Ravenclaw were at least more enthusiastic about learning, which could be seen from the content of their conversations. After all, if they hadn't read the textbooks and a series of books in advance, At least half of the questions would have been impossible to discuss smoothly as they were now because the Ravenclaw dormitory was located on a tower on the west side of the castle. The journey was not short. After 7 or 8 minutes, everyone climbed to the top of the tower called Ravenclaw Tower. At this time, an ancient, smooth wooden panel blocked the way. With a huge eagle-shaped bronze knocker on it, Prefect Robert Hilliard stepped forward, grabbed the knocker, and knocked on it. The eagle's beak immediately opened, but instead of making a bird call, it said in a gentle, musical voice, "What is too much for two, but just right for one? A secret," Robert Hilliard replied. Then he turned to the first-year students behind him and said, "Unlike the fixed passwords of other houses, our Ravenclaw's characteristic is the question asked by this eagle door knocker. Anyone who can answer the question correctly, regardless of which house they come from, can enter our common room. This is the open side of our house. However, only a handful of people can enter our house's common room each year." Hugo felt that this was likely because the wizarding world as a whole was somewhat lacking in certain aspects. For example, the Caro siblings, who were sent to teach at Hogwarts in the last year of the original story, could be said to be not too bad in terms of academic level, but they just couldn't answer the questions posed by the door knocker. It was probably like Hermione said to Snape's challenge at the end of her first year in the original novel. Many of the greatest wizards have no logical reasoning skills at all. Even so, Hugo still felt that those fixed passwords might be better. Because from a security point of view, this way of answering questions would always bring some uncertain danger to private places like dormitories. What if a high IQ criminal answered the question correctly and came in to commit a crime? Of course, this was not something Hugo needed to consider. Not to mention that there were so many magical spells in this world. Maybe the Ravenclaw common room dared to do this because Hogwarts had another method he didn't know that could guarantee everyone's safety, such as being able to distinguish whether the person outside the door was one of their own, and then ask those non-house members a question that was basically impossible to answer. Thinking of this, Hugo shook his head, shook off the messy thoughts in his mind, and then followed everyone into the Ravenclaw common room. After crossing the open door of the common room, a large, round room appeared in front of them, giving people a very ethereal feeling. Elegant arched windows opened in the walls, hung with blue and bronze silk. The arched windows faced the outside of the castle, and now they could see the starry sky and large masses of dark shadows in the distance through the windows. It seemed that if it were daytime, they should be able to see the surrounding mountains and a series of beautiful scenery while standing in the common room. The ceiling of the common room was a dome, painted with stars, and the dark blue carpet below was also covered with stars. There were tables, chairs, and bookshelves in the room. In the alcove opposite the door stood a tall white marble statue of Rowena Ravenclaw, the founder of Ravenclaw House. Next to the statue was a door leading to the student dormitories above. "I think with your intelligence, you should have already learned a lot through various books before being assigned to our house, so I don't need to emphasize it again and waste your time resting," Robert Hilliard said after everyone had walked to the open space in front of the statue. "So everyone can rest now. Your names are on your dormitory doors, and your luggage has already been placed at the head of the bed. I wish you all a good dream tonight." Unlike what he had imagined, Hugo did not hear the Ravenclaw prefect's welcome speech that he had seen on the official website in his previous life. But thinking about it, as Ravenclaw students who were very tolerant of outsiders and paid more attention to everyone's independence, it would not be very Ravenclaw-like to have the prefect say a lot of official platitudes. If anything, giving a welcome speech was more like something that Slytherin, a house that advocated order and hierarchy, would do. After listening to the prefect's brief speech, the first-year students walked into the door next to the statue. Inside the door was a fork in the road, with two signs hanging on it, reading Boys' Dormitory and Girls' Dormitory. After saying goodnight to Hermione and Veneto, Hugo walked in from the left staircase. Soon he found his dormitory and bed, and his luggage had already been placed. Perhaps because Ravenclaw itself had few people and was more yin than yang, the boys' dormitories here were all double rooms. And Hugo's roommate was Michael Corner, a mixed-blood black-haired wizard if his memory was correct. This Michael Corner should be the Ravenclaw student who dated Ginny in his 4th year and then dated Cho Chang after breaking up in his 5th year. Considering that both of the above were beauties and were not short of suitors, it could be inferred that his roommate should be a master with some tricks, but at this time, neither of them was in the mood to chat with each other. After all, after shaking all the way on the train and eating a big meal, everyone just wanted to lie on the bed and have a good sleep. So after simply saying hello and washing up in the bathroom, Hugo climbed onto his own four-poster bed with a sky blue flannel curtain. The bed was very soft and comfortable, so after closing his eyes, he quickly fell asleep in the sound of the wind blowing in front of the window. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Morning Exercise. Beep, beep. The next morning, just as dawn was breaking, Hugo was awakened from his bed by a loud bugle call. Of course, this bugle call wasn't a real sound, but appeared directly in his mind. I need to get up quickly and wash up a bit, then go out for a morning exercise before coming back to thoroughly clean myself, then go downstairs for breakfast and class, Hugo thought as he climbed out of the soft and comfortable bed. However, as soon as his feet touched the carpet, he noticed a piece of paper on the bedside table. Hugo picked up the paper and looked at it, discovering it was his class schedule for the current school year. First-year students at Hogwarts were required to take 7 compulsory subjects: astronomy, transfiguration, herbology, potions, etc., plus flying, for a total of 8 subjects among these courses, except for flying and astronomy, which were once a week. The rest had 2 to 3 classes per week, each class lasting about 2 hours. However, because a 10-minute break was arranged during these 2 hours, it was sometimes considered as 2 lessons according to the information marked on the timetable, except for astronomy, which was scheduled for the evening. The other courses were all arranged during the day, averaging 3 classes a day. Basically, the timetable was arranged with 1 class in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, which was quite in line with Hugo's memories of going directly to dinner after the last class in the afternoon. For some reason, the first-year morning classes were all scheduled at 10 a.m. Perhaps Hogwarts considered that these newly enrolled students were relatively young and needed more sleep. This was definitely good news for Hugo, as this arrangement gave him enough time to exercise. Because it was 7 a.m., his roommate Michael Corner was still asleep, so Hugo tiptoed out of bed, put on his clothes, and went to the bathroom for a quick wash before quietly leaving the room and heading to the common room. Good morning, Hugo. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw Veneto, dressed in sportswear, standing in the common room greeting him. Before coming, Hugo had told the ship girls not to reveal their identities usually, so they naturally called Hugo by his name directly. Good morning, Veneto. After greeting Veneto, the two walked out together. Exercising didn't actually require much space, and they quickly found an empty classroom in the castle below the tower and began to exercise. Because of the previous unlucky Commander Avatar, Hugo's physical fitness was now equivalent to that of an adult male after relatively formal training. So Veneto simply took out the physical training method of the Italian Navy Marines and began to train Hugo. Quick, run. The empty classroom they chose was about 20 meters long and 10 meters wide. So after warming up, Veneto and Hugo began to run around the empty classroom. A few minutes later, Firefly also rushed over from the Gryffindor Tower and joined the activity. After 45 minutes of exercise, Hugo felt refreshed, and the grogginess he had when he first woke up was swept away. So after saying goodbye to Firefly, he returned to the Ravenclaw Tower with Veneto. For some reason, this door knocker liked to ask questions related to philosophy. And these kinds of questions happened to hit Hugo and Veneto's weak spots in knowledge. Fortunately, Hood, as an elegant lady, was quite knowledgeable about philosophical questions. So they were able to cope with these questions through the Admiral network. Where have you been? As Hugo and Veneto walked into the Ravenclaw common room, they were greeted by Hermione, who was reading a textbook in the common room. If Penelope hadn't told me she saw you two go out early in the morning, I would have thought you two were missing. The Ravenclaw girls' dormitory was a 3-person room, but because the number of girls in Ravenclaw was not a multiple of 3, Hermione and Veneto happened to enjoy a 3-person dormitory. However, when Hermione woke up this morning, she found that a roommate was gone, and after packing up and going out to ask, she learned that a roommate and her younger brother had gone out early in the morning in sportswear, as if they were going out to exercise. So she simply took her textbook and waited here while previewing, waiting for the two to come back for breakfast. We met in the common room and went out to exercise directly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you in advance, Hugo said to Hermione somewhat embarrassedly. Okay, now I'll go tidy up, and then we'll go to breakfast together. After speaking, he ran back to the dormitory, took a quick shower, and changed into his school uniform. Then he casually woke up Michael Corner, who was still sound asleep after tossing around just now. "Oh, good morning, Hugo." After opening his eyes, Michael Corner greeted Hugo, then grabbed the watch on the bedside table and glanced at it. "Oh my god, it's almost 8 o'clock in 5 minutes. I think I need to get up quickly. I was originally thinking of previewing this morning." As he spoke, Michael Corner rolled out of bed and rushed into the bathroom to wash up. At 8 o'clock sharp, he met up with the two girls on time with Hugo, and then went downstairs to the Great Hall for breakfast with the books they would use for class in the morning. In fact, there was still some time after breakfast before class, but for Ravenclaw students, it was better to waste this time running back to the Ravenclaw Tower than to find an empty room near the classroom to study. Therefore, Hugo found that almost every Ravenclaw student who came to breakfast brought their books. No matter what time they had class in the morning, the Great Hall served breakfast from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock, so when Hugo and the others walked in, they saw a lot of breakfast on the table, just like a hotel buffet. After sitting down at the Ravenclaw table, Hugo and the others first waved to Firefly, who was sitting at the Gryffindor table, and then began to discuss the matters concerning today's courses. "It seems Firefly is doing quite well in Gryffindor," Hugo said to Veneto through the Admiral network, because he saw that Firefly came with 2 roommates, and the 3 of them were talking and laughing while eating breakfast. This was much better than Hermione not having a single friend for a long time after entering school. In the original text, the dormitory where Firefly was located was the same dormitory where Hermione was in the original text, so Hugo made such a remark, "That's for sure," Veneto, with her mouth full of sandwiches, said to Hugo through the Admiral network. "Speaking of which, Firefly is a perfect Gryffindor student, lively, enthusiastic, brave, and most importantly, not only is she not afraid of things, but she also dares to cause trouble." "Okay, you're right," Hugo shrugged helplessly. It seemed that Gryffindor's reputation for causing trouble was too loud, so much so that now, whenever Gryffindor was mentioned, people thought of causing trouble. Chapter 29 Class. "Our first class this morning is Transfiguration," Hermione said, turning to Hugo after taking a large gulp of milk-soaked cereal. "I heard from a senior that Professor McGonagall is a very strict professor. I hope her course won't be too difficult. At least the first-year courses shouldn't be too hard," Hugo said after thinking for a moment, because even those students from wizarding families have never learned any magic before entering school. Learning magic is a fresh start for everyone, so it definitely won't be too difficult at the beginning. "You have a point," Hermione nodded, then quietly ate her breakfast. After finishing their meal, they followed at least 13 first-year Ravenclaw students, carrying their books, to an empty classroom near the Transfiguration classroom. Next was study time for the Ravenclaws. Everyone took out the textbooks for the subjects they had that day and started studying. The entire classroom was quiet, and aside from the occasional cough, you could hear a pin drop. It has to be said that, compared to the Gryffindors who basically couldn't sit still, the Ravenclaws, who liked to quietly stay in one place and read, were the complete opposite. No wonder Hermione seemed so out of place with the others in her house in the original story. So, Hermione coming to Ravenclaw is also a very good choice. After the previous Transfiguration class ended, the first-year students who were studying in the classroom gradually packed up their things and walked towards the Transfiguration classroom next door. However, because Hermione hadn't finished reading a knowledge point, when Hugo and the others walked into the classroom, there were only 4 or 5 minutes left before class started. "I'm sorry for keeping you waiting," Hermione apologized to Veneto and Hugo as she walked into the classroom. By this time, most of the students in the classroom had already arrived, but some were talking and laughing, and some were reading. No one paid attention to the tabby cat sitting motionless on the podium. After seeing the cat, Hugo walked to the side of the podium, bowed to the cat, and then pulled Hermione towards an empty seat, while Veneto walked to another empty seat and sat down. "What were you doing just now?" Hermione asked Hugo curiously after sitting down. "Why did you bow to that cat? Could it be that cat?" After saying this, Hermione, who is very smart, also realized that something might be wrong, so she immediately closed her mouth and thought silently. Soon, she turned her head and looked at Hugo, asking, "When I was reading the Transfiguration textbook before, I found that the textbook said that wizards have a type of transformation called animagus that allows them to turn into animals. Could it be that cat?" "You're right," Hugo nodded, then explained, "If I'm not mistaken, this cat should be Professor McGonagall. When I was reading yesterday, I saw in the book that there were only 7 registered legal animagi in the entire 20th century, and our Professor McGonagall is one of them. If you pay attention, you can see that the pattern on the face of this tabby cat is the same as the glasses she wears." After learning that this cat was Professor McGonagall, Hermione shook her head somewhat, then opened her textbook and seriously began reading the things she would be learning in a while. She believed that Professor McGonagall turning into a cat and standing on the podium was actually a test for the students. And she had failed this test just now, so she made up her mind that she absolutely couldn't mess up again. After class started, the students who took Transfiguration class with the Ravenclaws were the Hufflepuffs, and most of the Badgers were well behaved, unlike some houses that like to cause trouble. So this led to the fact that although there was some noise in the classroom during the time before the class bell rang, it was generally relatively orderly. As soon as the class bell rang, the tabby cat on the podium jumped off the desk, and at the same time as it jumped down, it transformed into a tall, serious-looking woman. Mr. Granger, I am very pleased to see that you recognized my identity for your excellent observation skills and careful preview before class. I will add 5 points to Ravenclaw, Professor McGonagall said, nodding in Hugo's direction. As a serious and conscientious professor, Professor McGonagall appreciated hard-working students like Hugo. However, after praising Hugo, Professor McGonagall returned to her previous seriousness. She turned around and walked onto the podium, then lowered her head and said to all the students in the classroom, "Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous spell in your Hogwarts courses," she said. "Anyone who is mischievous in my class, I will ask them to leave and never allow them to come back, and I have warned you." Then she turned her desk into a pig, and then turned it back. The students were all attracted and couldn't wait to start learning, but they soon realized that it would take a long time to turn furniture into animals. After they took down a lot of complex and difficult notes, she gave each of them a match and started to let them try to turn it into a needle. Professor McGonagall is indeed a wizard with great achievements in Transfiguration, not to mention that she can complete animagus, the most top-notch magic in Transfiguration. Just turning a table into a pig is already very impressive. You need to know that pigs have the highest insulation to magic. And turning things into pigs is definitely the most difficult type of animal transformation. After marveling at Professor McGonagall's magic level, Hugo began to try to turn the match in front of him into a needle with the buff of the Supervisor Network Soul Ink. He completed this transformation before his sister, a pure-blood Ravenclaw student. "Very good, Mr. Granger," Professor McGonagall said, picking up the needle and looking at it. The needle accurately produced a sharp needle tip and a hole in the tail of the needle, which can be considered very good for a beginner. As the first student to complete the transformation, I will add another 3 points to Ravenclaw. By the time class was over, only 5 people in the entire classroom had completed this transformation, and that included Hermione and Veneto. Professor McGonagall was naturally not very satisfied with the progress of most people, so she assigned a not very long essay and asked everyone to hand it in at the next class. "How did you do it?" After class, Hugo's roommate, Michael Corner, walked over and asked curiously, "Why can I only turn the wooden match into an iron match, but I can't turn it into a needle?" "That's because you didn't maintain a balance between material transformation and shape transformation in your will." Orange pointed out his problem after listening to what his roommate asked. Hugo had encountered this problem when he was experimenting with various magics during the summer vacation before, so it was very simple to solve. Just like Professor McGonagall said in class just now, magic is definitely not something that can be released smoothly by waving a wand and chanting spells. It contains a series of profound principles, and the problem that Corner encountered was also the most common type of problem, and it was very simple to solve. Just maintain your will when casting the spell. After Hugo pointed out the problem, Corner quickly showed a clear expression. "I understand, thank you," he said, closing his notebook. "Let's go eat quickly. I hope those good dishes are still waiting for us at this time." Chapter 30. First day of school. When it was time for lunch, several first-year Ravenclaw students came to introduce themselves to Hugo. Clearly, they had seen his performance in class and made a special trip to meet him. As Ravenclaw students, they could accurately judge, from subtle clues, which classmates in their year were likely to stand out on the future. After lunch and a short rest, everyone returned to the Ravenclaw Tower to relax for a while, and then, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they took the textbooks for their afternoon classes and went to the 4th floor of the castle together. The first class in the afternoon was Professor Flitwick's Charms class, so everyone obviously left earlier. After all, it was their head of house's class, and everyone wanted to leave a good impression on Professor Flitwick. When they arrived at the 4th floor, Hugo saw that the staircase on the 4th floor was a fork in the road. Professor Flitwick's Charms classroom was located on the left fork. There was no one on the right fork. According to Professor Dumbledore's words at the opening feast, the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor was a forbidden area of the school. Although Hugo roughly knew what was inside and knew that he would definitely have to go in and take a look to get destiny points, It would definitely not be under the current circumstances without any preparation. Finally, after taking one last look at this place, which was theoretically the final hurdle of the school year, Hugo followed the others and turned left at the intersection towards the Charms classroom. However, right at the intersection, several Ravenclaw students curiously stopped and looked down the right corridor. "Get out of here!" Filch suddenly appeared from somewhere and made a gesture of shooing them away. "If you loiter here again, I will send you all to detention." Hearing Filch's sudden shout, the curious Ravenclaw students were frightened and quickly followed a group. After all, no one wanted to be in detention on the first day of school. Ravenclaw's Charms class was with a Gryffindor, so not long after entering the classroom, they saw the Gryffindor students also entering one after another. Firefly and her two roommates entered the classroom early, so they had time to wave and say hello to Terenci when they saw him. Soon the bell rang, and Professor Flitwick walked in. He was a short wizard who was rumored to have goblin blood. However, no one would be so impolite as to ask him about it due to his height. He had to stand on a stack of books to reach the lectern when he taught. Because it was the first class today, the first thing after class was to call the roll. When he called out Harry Potter's name, he actually shrieked excitedly and fell to the ground, disappearing. Hugo always felt that as a professor who had experienced many storms, Flitwick should not be so excited to see Harry Potter. After all, he was not a Harry Potter fan like Ginny or Colin. Considering that he might not be a pure human wizard, Hugo suspected that this might be due to his bloodline. Just like Hagrid, as a giant hybrid, had strong magical resistance and a physique far superior to ordinary humans, but also had some problems with his values and perceptions. Professor Flitwick, as a goblin hybrid, might also have some differences from ordinary human wizards, considering that Professor Flitwick had won the dueling championship when he was young. And that goblins could not only cast magic without wands but were also agile enough to use cold weapons when facing wizards. In the 7th book, when they went to Gringotts to rob the Horcrux, the goblins were all holding short swords, which shows that this is a standard equipment used by goblins. Hugo suspected that Professor Flitwick inherited the goblins' powerful magic and agile hands and feet. However, what you gain, you must lose. And Professor Flitwick's performance today made Hugo realize that Professor Flitwick might have some differences from ordinary humans in other aspects besides his special appearance. For example, he might be more easily excited than ordinary people when faced with some special events. Just like just now, you must know that Harry Potter was not only the person who defeated the Dark Lord that year, but also the only person on record to have escaped from the killing curse. So, for Professor Flitwick, Harry Potter did have special significance, so it was normal for something in his bloodline to be triggered and for him to fall off the stack of books. Very good, very good. Looking at Hugo successfully using his wand to move the small piece of paper placed in front of him left and right on the table after reciting the spell, Professor Flitwick nodded with satisfaction and added 5 points for Hugo this time. The magic was much faster than casting the transfiguration spell in the previous transfiguration class, because when practicing transfiguration at home, he always tried to turn scraps of paper into small iron pieces. Although the casting process and spells were exactly the same, whether it was turning a match into a needle or turning a piece of paper into an iron piece, there would be some differences in operational awareness. Therefore, even if Hugo was already able to successfully turn a piece of paper into an iron piece at home, he still had to adjust a bit to cast this magic when facing Professor McGonagall's request to turn a match into a needle, and the simple levitation charm was completely different. Whether you were moving a piece of paper or moving a feather, the operation was basically the same, and there was no need to change it because of the different casting objects. This is why Hugo was able to release the levitation charm at the fastest speed in class. In the following herbology class, Hermione replaced Hugo as the main force for score and points. Anyway, the practical operation of the first-year herbology class was not very difficult. The core was some memorization content. So Hermione was quite skilled in this area, and potions class was when Veneto showed her skills. As a ship girl, accurately following the operating procedures taught in the textbook and by Professor Snape to brew potions was simply not something that flesh and blood creatures could compare to. At least Hugo felt that he could not do manual operations as precise as being measured by sophisticated instruments at the same time, because potions class was with Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. Professor Snape did not need to express his anger towards Gryffindor or favor Slytherin. In this case, he could naturally treat each student more fairly. Not bad, Miss Veneto. After scooping out a little of the pimple cure potion that Veneto had just brewed in her cauldron with a spoon, Snape nodded very slightly. However, Simply operating according to the textbook will not allow you to go too far on this path. If you read the textbook carefully and think about it, you will find that if you put a little bit of citrus leaves in the potion, it can reduce the stinging sensation produced after applying this potion to the face. Professor Snape is too strict. After class, Hermione complained for her roommate when walking towards the Great Hall. You obviously operated perfectly according to the book, but he didn't give you any points. No wonder the students say he is biased. Okay. Hearing Hermione's nagging, Veneto smiled and said to her roommate, "Anyway, we really learned a lot of knowledge in this kind of class, and that is the most important purpose of our coming to school. As for the professor's unsatisfactory attitude, we just need to have a normal heart and not be affected by him." Chapter 31 Libraries and Books. The dinner at Hogwarts was as lavish as ever. Although it couldn't compare to the opening feast the previous night, it was still far more luxurious than most students' dinners at home. At least, Veneto nodded with satisfaction during the meal and ate quite a bit, perhaps due to her previous military life. Veneto ate very quickly. She finished her dinner in a short time and watched Hugo, forcing him to speed up his eating as well. Fortunately, the power of the adult represented by the previous avatar wasn't limited to arms and hands, but also included the muscles in his cheeks. So, he was finally able to finish his dinner quickly while still chewing carefully. After dinner, it was naturally time for self-study in the library, especially for Ravenclaw students. Therefore, after everyone returned to their dormitories to retrieve a few books, they immediately headed straight to the library, planning to do their homework first and then find time to read and study. "Seriously, the chefs at Hogwarts are really good," Veneto said softly to Hugo as they walked to the library. "You know, back then, we were considered the best-fed people, and the chefs in this school are even better than our chefs back then. I really want to find a house elf to help with the cooking. That's a bit difficult," Hugo said in a low voice. After all, house elves only exist in the mansions of those ancient and wealthy pure-blood families, and other than that, only Hogwarts has them. And we obviously can't find a house elf for ourselves from these two places. As for house elves in other places, we can't find them with our current status, but that's not absolute. Hugo suddenly thought of something. If everything goes as planned, we might have a chance to find a house elf to cook for us next year. While discussing this issue, the two entered the library, and they immediately shut their mouths. Because at this time, Madame Pants, the librarian, was looking at them with a serious expression. "Please be quiet in the library," Madame Pants warned them sternly after seeing them close their mouths and make a gesture of admitting their mistake. "Considering that you are first-year students entering the library for the first time, I will forgive you this time. But if you do this again next time, I will have to kick you out." Because Hugo and Veneto had eaten relatively quickly earlier, there were many empty tables in the library when they arrived. They quickly found a relatively secluded and quiet table for four and sat down, then took out the homework assigned today and began to write. A few minutes later, Hermione also walked into the library and sat down next to them. More than half an hour later, Hugo and the others began to be thankful that they had arrived early enough. Because a few minutes ago, a group of students had poured into the library to do their homework and look up information. Seats like the one they were sitting at, which weren't easily disturbed, had long been snatched up by those students, and some of the later arrivals even had to squeeze together with others. With 6 people sitting around a table meant for 4 because of the Admiral network, especially since Hood and Belfast had finished their daytime tasks and were resting, Hugo quickly digested the knowledge he had learned today and completed his homework with a joint effort of the 4 ship girls. After connecting to them, then, he and Veneto walked to the bookshelf, brought back a large pile of books, placed them on the table, and began to browse through them. According to their previous plan, they would store all the content of these books into the Admiral network, and then learn on their own. After organizing it more than 20 minutes after Hugo finished his homework, Hermione also finished her homework and shook her hands, preparing to look at other books. As a result, she looked up and saw Hugo, who was sitting across from her, holding a thick book with a black cover bound in iron, reading it. "Can you understand this book?" Hermione asked, tapping the table in front of Hugo with her hand after carefully looking at the silver title on the cover that had begun to peel off. Because she discovered that this book was called Principles of Charms. Professor Flitwick had previously said that this book was a purely theoretical book that only students who were applying for NEWT charms needed to read. For others, unless they wanted to do research in this area, there was no need to read this book. "Of course I can't understand it," Hugo shrugged and said. Even with a cheat-level knowledge, it was too profound for him. His current level was limited to being able to understand only a few words and phrases, and the rest was just memorizing it and uploading it to the Admiral network. If you can't understand it, why are you reading it? Hermione widened her eyes and looked puzzled. If you insist on reading it when you can't understand it, I don't think you'll gain anything except wasting time. I just want to memorize them. Hugo shrugged and said his purpose, half truthfully. Although it's useless now, I think it will be useful in the future. Can you memorize them all? Hermione asked, seeming a little incomprehensible. This book is so thick, and there are a lot of nouns in it that we can't understand at this stage. Of course, Hugo said, handing the book to Hermione and saying, the first 30 pages, as long as you say 10 words from the previous sentence, I can continue. Hermione took the book and checked 7 or 8 places, and Hugo successfully continued them all. Of course, this was definitely not because he had the ability to remember everything he saw, but because he was directly using the Admiral network to cheat. The knowledge that had been organized by the Admiral network was very easy to find, as convenient as searching for something on a computer. However, Hermione didn't know this. After testing it, she looked at Hugo with a shocked expression. How did you do this? I don't remember you having this ability before. As Hugo's twin sister, who had grown up with him since childhood, Hermione knew Hugo's previous situation very well. In her impression, Hugo's memory was indeed stronger than hers, but definitely not exaggerated to this extent. I don't know either. Hugo shrugged and said, I only know that my memory has greatly improved since I went to Diagon Alley that day. Maybe it was caused by the magic stimulating my brain. I really envy you. After listening to Hugo's explanation, Hermione didn't feel that there was anything wrong. After all, situations like Hugo's were not uncommon. For example, some Muggle-born wizards suddenly grew taller after entering the wizarding world. So, it was not surprising that his memory suddenly became better in the following time. Hugo devoted all his attention to reading these books, striving to record this knowledge into the Admiral network with the highest efficiency. Chapter 32 Campus Life. On the evening of the first day of school, Hugo was not only doing homework and recording knowledge. After returning to the dormitory, he finished washing up and lay on the bed. Before going to sleep, he communicated with Hood and Belfast, who were now in London, through the Admiral network, and dealt with some things related to them. For example, Hugo opened up his memories of his previous life to Hood and Belfast, because these two ship girls said that they now needed to earn as much money as possible to prepare a good environment for their sisters who would arrive later. After a brief thought, Hugo simply opened up most of his memories to them, letting them find opportunities to make money on their own. After all, Hugo couldn't go out while at school. In this world, which was very similar to his previous life, Hugo's memories of his previous life could be said to be worth a fortune. Especially when he was a part-time online novelist, he specifically researched a lot of information in order to write a novel about urban rebirth, and all of those materials could now be recalled with the help of the Admiral network. What's even better was that, because of certain characteristics of the website where he submitted his work, he was wary of writing about content related to his motherland. Therefore, in order to prevent his efforts from being wasted, he set the protagonist as a Chinese American in Europe and the United States, so most of the information he researched back then was related to Europe and the United States. I didn't expect that I wanted to write a novel about urban rebirth, but in the end, I became the protagonist of an urban rebirth story myself. After sending that batch of memories to the two ship girls in London, Hugo thought. As for the fact that the knowledge was being used by ship girls outside, Hugo automatically ignored it. After all, admirals and ship girls can often be regarded as one. After saying goodbye to the ship girls, Hugo quickly fell into a dream. On the one hand, the house elves did a really good job of tidying up the bed, making it soft and comfortable, so that people felt sleepy after lying down. On the other hand, the memory transfer and chat just now took more than an hour, and it was indeed a bit late now. Hugo's first day at Hogwarts could be said to have gone relatively smoothly, but when classes started the next day, all sorts of problems began to appear. For example, the low level of the defense against the dark arts class, which the whole class was really looking forward to, was obviously beyond everyone's expectations. In everyone's impression, this class should teach everyone how to fight with magic, especially for those little wizards who came from the Muggle world. The image of a wizard who could cast fireballs was in line with their image of a spellcaster. Although there were no computer games in this era, and game consoles were also very crude, in 1974, Gary Gygax and 3 of his friends launched the Dungeons U0026 Dragons tabletop game. Most of the familiar images in Western fantasy originated from this tabletop game. Naturally, these Muggle-born students also brought the image of the mage in the game into the image of the wizard, but in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Professor Quirrell almost became a joke. His classroom was filled with the smell of garlic, and everyone said it was to drive away a vampire he met in Romania, fearing that the vampire would turn around and catch him. He told them that his large turban was a gift from an African prince, who thanked him for helping him get rid of the entanglement of a reanimated corpse. However, none of the students present believed what he said, because what he said was too simple, and when someone wanted to ask for more detailed information, his face turned red and he talked vaguely about the weather. It seems that we can only rely on self-study for this year's Defense Against the Dark Arts class. After class, Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral network, "I always thought that the novels used exaggeration when writing about it, but now it seems that Quirrell's level is really bad. By the way, do you think his current state is pretending, or is he really like this? His IQ should be at this level now." Hugo thought for a moment and said, "As the best magic school in Britain, there must be certain requirements for recruiting teachers here. It is impossible to recruit some garbage. At least, Professor Quirrell shouldn't be in this situation when he applied for the job, and his current state is obviously due to Voldemort's possession. The two brains are incompatible, resulting in obvious problems." Although in the original book, Quirrell said to Harry in the final level, "Snape certainly doesn't look like a good person. With him there, who would suspect poor Professor Quirrell?" But the fact that he was normal during the interview and turned into a useless person after entering the school was already very suspicious, and being able to come up with tricks full of loopholes and still be proud of himself can only mean that Quirrell's brain and Voldemort's brain were completely scrapped after being put together, so he came up with such a bad idea. On the other hand, it is very reasonable that his lectures are full of loopholes when his brain is damaged. According to Hugo's speculation, Professor Dumbledore probably already knew what conspiracy Quirrell might be preparing at this time, but he felt that everything was under his control. So he was preparing to give Harry a chance, which is why he remained silent after discovering that Quirrell was wrong. It's just that Dumbledore probably didn't expect Voldemort to stick to the back of Quirrell's head, otherwise he would have killed the other party long ago. Instead of sending Harry to the other party's face after a brief discussion, Hugo and the others picked up their books and walked to the next classroom. In any case, the smell of manure in Professor Sprout's greenhouse was much better than the smell of garlic in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. At least, the specially fermented manure could still make people think of the field. Soon it was the weekend. After reading a book in the library for a morning and finishing lunch, Hugo suggested that everyone could take a good stroll in the castle and then relax. After all, sitting there reading all day, Hugo felt that his eyes and brain could handle it, but his butt might not be able to handle it. It would be miserable if he got hemorrhoids at a young age. Although Hugo also believed that wizards could solve this kind of problem with just a potion or a wave of their wand, he didn't want to go to Madame Pomfrey for this reason, which would be too embarrassing. Moreover, for them, they had only recently figured out the routes from Ravenclaw Tower to the dining hall and various classrooms. It could be said that they had been to less than 1/3 of this 1,000-year-old castle, at most. And the other 2/3 was where they wanted to go for a walk today. "How did you recognize these roads?" Hermione asked curiously, watching Veneto accurately lead herself and Hugo through corridor after corridor based on the map drawn by several Ravenclaw upperclassmen, because she found that Veneto could almost find the most reasonable route in the shortest time. This may be a talent, Veneto didn't know how to explain it. "You must know that the internal structure of warships, especially large warships, is no simpler than Hogwarts Castle. One of the most important things for the crew of those ships after boarding is to recognize the structure of the warship, so Veneto, as a ship girl, naturally has an extremely strong sense of direction." Just as the group was walking to the outside of a somewhat remote empty room on the 3rd floor, a sudden explosion came from the classroom. Chapter 33 Meet the Weasley Brothers. What happened? Having heard the explosion, Veneto, who was particularly sensitive to such sounds, immediately rushed to the door, took hold of the handle, and gently pushed it with a bang. The previously locked door was pushed open by Veneto, and instantly, a strange, rotten egg smell rushed out, accompanied by a cloud of yellow smoke. Seeing this, Veneto immediately moved away from the doorway and shouted, "Is anyone hurt here? Do you need us to get the professors to come and help?" Cough, cough. "Definitely not," a voice came from inside, sounding like a boy in the throes of puberty. "It's just that we accidentally blew up the cauldron while brewing a potion. No one's hurt, and we can handle it." Soon, the smoke completely dissipated, revealing the state of the empty room. This empty room was quite small, only about 14 classrooms in size. Most of the space inside was filled with old furniture and random junk, making it look like it was being used as a storage room. You must understand that Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was originally Slytherin Castle in the Middle Ages. Therefore, when it was built, it was designed as a pure military fortress. Such a fortress would naturally be divided into countless small rooms for storing various weapons and supplies, and for providing accommodations for personnel. Even if Slytherin was a wizard, he couldn't have built a structure that was too far ahead of its time. And in the beginning, Hogwarts didn't have many students, so those divided small rooms were sufficient as classrooms. Later, as the number of students increased, those classrooms began to feel cramped. So, the wizards began to gradually change the spatial layout of the castle, adding or subtracting from the original structure, eventually forming the room layout of today. However, because the wizards adhered to the principle of good enough is good enough, there were still some ancient small rooms that remained in their original state in the castle and were used as various storage rooms. For example, the room Hugo and the others were facing was one such room now. The small patch of open space remaining in the room was occupied by a long table, on which were placed a large pile of various ingredients that had already been prepared. In addition, 2 cauldrons were placed on the table. Beneath one of the cauldrons was a cluster of purple magical flames, while inside the pot, a large amount of slime-like, emerald green, gelatinous liquid was constantly churning, emitting a slight sour smell. The other pot, however, had completely exploded, with a large pile of asphalt-like, dark brown goo smeared all over half the table and the floor. The strange smoke from earlier was produced after this pot exploded. Even though it had been ventilated for nearly a minute, the pile of goo was still releasing wisps of yellow smoke into the air, causing everyone's noses in the room to be filled with a faint, lingering stench. Standing beside the table were a pair of red-haired twin brothers, except one of them now had large and small red, swollen scabies all over his face, making him wince in pain. His brother was taking out a crystal bottle and applying some orange-yellow ointment to his scabies. "Good afternoon, Mr. Weasley," Hugo greeted. The moment he entered and saw the 2 of them, he had guessed their identities. After all, Hogwarts wasn't that big, and the only red-haired twin brothers in the entire school were the Weasley twins. More importantly, as important supporting characters in the original story, Firefly had already transmitted their appearances to Hugo via the Admiral network. A Ravenclaw low-grade student, the Weasley with the injured face glanced at the blue house crests on Hugo and the others' chests and said, "Why aren't you staying in the library reading books at this time? And how do you know us? Even if we study hard, we can't always stay in the library reading books. If we just study like that, we probably won't learn much knowledge and will easily break our spirits and bodies." Hearing the question from the Weasley in front of him, Hugo smiled and replied, "Besides, we're first-year students, so we should take a good look at what our school actually looks like. As for how we recognized you 2 seniors, it's very simple," Hugo revealed a smile. "There are only 3 pairs of twins at Hogwarts, and the 2 pairs, including my sister and I, are first-year students. So, you 2 must be the Gryffindor third-year seniors, the famous Weasley twins at the school. You must be the Granger siblings." After hearing Hugo's words, the twins also recognized Hugo and the others. As for the other one, she should be Miss Veneto. It was normal for the Weasley twins to recognize Hugo and the others. After all, as twins themselves, it was very reasonable for them to pay attention to other twins in the school. And Veneto's special name, coupled with her outstanding appearance, made it not surprising that she was remembered by others. "I'm George, and he's Fred." The Weasley who was applying the medicine to his brother raised his head to introduce himself, then asked with some curiosity, "You said we are famous? I'm glad to hear that from a Ravenclaw student. Tell me, where are we famous? Is it because we played a huge role in the Quidditch match last year when we made our debut?" "No, of course not." Hugo's lips curled slightly. "I heard our seniors say that the Gryffindor Weasley brothers have monopolized the top 2 spots on the list of individual point deductions every year since they entered school, and can be considered the kings of point deductions. What's even more impressive is that they can always add those points back after being deducted. If it weren't for that cat, we wouldn't have been caught by that squib Filch when we were sneaking around at night. It's all Mrs. Norris's fault." "Ouch, be gentle." Before he could finish speaking, Fred, whose pustules on his face had mostly healed due to the medicine, let out a small cry of pain because his brother's movements were too rough. Clearly, the Weasley brothers didn't think there was anything wrong with their nighttime escapades, but they were resentful about being caught, so much so that they had to complain when they saw strangers like Hugo and the others. "Seriously, That's their job. Hermione, who is usually more rule-abiding, wasn't very impressed with the twins' violation of school rules, but she was quite interested in the potion the Weasley brothers were brewing. Are you brewing a potion to treat scabies? But why did you change the dosage of the ingredients? You can tell what we're brewing, George asked curiously. If I remember correctly, you should have only had 2 potions lessons. Are Ravenclaws all this smart? But the problem is, this potion is the potion we learned in our first lesson, and in class, Professor Snape told us several ways in which this potion could fail. And your pot looks very similar to that, Hermione said, looking at the remnants of the asphalt-like potion. Alice, that old bat never tells us Gryffindors these things in class, otherwise we wouldn't be like this now, Fred sighed. At this time the bumps on his face had all been eliminated by the potion, and he was looking at the condition of his face with a mirror that he had just conjured. Old bat? Hermione asked with some confusion. It's Snape. Don't you think he looks like a bat, wearing black robes all day long, walking back and forth in the underground classroom in a gloomy manner? George said with a smile. Chapter 34 Communicate. Professor Snape is our potions professor. It probably isn't good to give him such an awful nickname. As a representative of the good students, Hermione didn't quite agree with this practice of giving nicknames. Although she was quite dissatisfied with Snape's bias, she still believed that a professor is a professor, and some respect should always be given. You're a Ravenclaw student, it's not surprising you think that way, George said, shrugging his shoulders. Snape at least maintains a basic moral bottom line when dealing with you and the Hufflepuffs. But for us Gryffindors, he frequently crosses that line, like what happened last week during the first lesson for the first years, Fred said, sounding somewhat indignant. A new student from our house named Neville Longbottom caused his cauldron to explode in class because he added ingredients at the wrong time. But Harry Potter, who was sitting at another table, was unfairly blamed for not telling Longbottom not to add porcupine quills and had points deducted. That is indeed a bit much, Veneto said, shaking her head. As a ship girl, she carried a strong military aura, so she couldn't stand this kind of rule-breaking. If that's the case, I think he has some issues with his professional ethics. As a tragic figure in the original story, Snape certainly had aspects that made people feel pity for him. But purely from the perspective of a professor, Snape was not very qualified in terms of professional ethics. At the very least, as a teacher, habitually being influenced to discriminate against a portion of the students was clearly unacceptable. After the twins' explanation, Hermione also felt that Snape had indeed gone too far in some areas, but she still insisted that they shouldn't give the professor such an awful nickname. However, unlike the Hermione in the original book, she had matured a lot in her dealings with people because of Hugo's presence, and she didn't continue to refute the twins' views. By the way, what are you brewing these potions for? Veneto asked curiously, looking at the potions on the table. These should all be first-year potions, right? Are you trying to improve them? We are improving them, Fred and George said, raising their eyebrows at the same time when they talked about their hard work. It's just not quite what you imagine. We're trying to make some, how should we put it? More interesting potions. For example, Hermione asked curiously, watching Fred move the cauldron away from the fire. I see that your improvement is quite impressive, changing the original external Scabbers potion into an internal one, but I don't feel that it has much value. Hermione's analysis was very objective. If they changed the original external potion to an internal one, not to mention adding a bunch of extra ingredients to the potion, doubling the cost of this already cheap potion, the strange taste alone would be enough to make most people avoid it. But what we need isn't just a potion that can be taken orally to treat Scabbers, George explained. Actually, we want to make a potion that makes people break out in Scabbers all over their body after taking a sip, as well as an antidote to go with it. What you're making should be a prank toy. These ideas are quite creative. Hugo had already guessed what the Weasley twins were thinking while Hermione was still wondering why they would make such a seemingly pointless potion. It seemed that the series of prank products they developed later, until they finally opened Wheel-Eye's Wizard Wheezes, wasn't something they came up with in their upper years. It was very likely that they already had this idea on their first day of school. For example, the potion they were thinking about now was very similar to the skiving snack box later on. Yes, that's right. George and Fred smiled at Hugo at the same time. They were very happy that someone could guess their thoughts. The prank toys sold on the market now are too old. Most of them are things that our parents or even our grandparents played with. We think this situation should be changed. A very good idea. Hugo's praise was sincere. At least he felt that it was very ambitious for young people of the Weasley brothers' age to be determined to innovate in one area. And he suddenly realized that this could be an entry point for him to make money. Making money was very important to Hugo, because money in the wizarding world could allow him to acquire the skills possessed by the ship girls. However, because even the cheapest skills required 100 galleons, Hugo could only watch those skills and drool. So, considering the Weasley brothers' future earning potential, he thought it would be a good idea to get involved in their business at this time. So he said, "Why do you have to make this potion oral, needlessly increasing the complexity of brewing the potion and the cost of manufacturing? But if we don't make it oral, how can we use it for pranks?" George asked, somewhat puzzled. "We can't just take a bottle of this stuff and splash it on someone's face, can we? But if we do that, it's an assault, not a prank." "You can use wipes soaked in the potion," Hugo thought for a moment and said. "Some people use wipes to wipe their mouths after eating. Would that be a successful prank? Then you use another matching wipe soaked in the antidote, and wipe it off when the prank is over to eliminate the effects. The wipes you're talking about should be what muggles use, right? But we wizards don't use that kind of thing." Although he hadn't heard of wipes because wizards didn't use them, Fred could roughly guess what they were based on the composition of the word, Mr. Granger. "Your idea is indeed great," George said, comforting Hugo as he looked at the expression on his face. "I swear this is definitely not sarcasm, because you've given us some new ideas." "That's indeed the case," Fred also said. "Perhaps because our whole family are wizards, our thinking has been limited in many ways. Whenever we have a problem, we think of solving it with magic. But your suggestion just now, although it can't be used in the magical world, it has opened up a new way of thinking for us. We can take some non-magical means to solve the problems we encounter, without being bound by the need to use magic." Next, the two sides talked enthusiastically about this issue. Hugo and the others introduced the Weasley brothers to many prank toys that ordinary people didn't need magic for, while the Weasley twins answered some questions about the magical world and magic that Hugo and the others raised from this conversation. Hugo and the others found that the Weasley twins were quite skilled in many direct operations of magic. However, they had considerable shortcomings in theoretical learning, especially in subjects similar to potions. This tendency was very serious. But this didn't prevent Hugo and the others from learning the knowledge they lacked from the twins through the exchange between the two sides. Ideas from the Muggle world and the Wizarding world began to merge and collide. It wasn't until the sky darkened that they realized that they had been chatting for a whole afternoon, and it was now time for dinner. "I'm really glad to have met you today," George said to Hugo on the way to the Great Hall. "I hope we can have the opportunity to chat again in the future." "Of course, I think so too," Hugo said. "I'll go to Gryffindor to ask you for advice then." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Combat Practice. Being able to meet the Weasley twins at this time was indeed a pleasant surprise, but all that could be done now was to get acquainted, leaving a seed for deeper friendship and communication later on. After all, they weren't in the same house or year level, and they were complete strangers before. So, everything had to be taken slowly and steadily. When Sunday arrived the next day, Hugo, after eating and having lunch as usual, Hermione felt unwell and went back to the dormitory for a nap. Veneto then dragged Hugo to the 8th floor of the castle. On one wall of this place hung a huge tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy trying to teach trolls ballet, while the other side was a blank wall. When Veneto dragged Hugo to this place, he found that Firefly was already waiting there. Seeing Hugo's arrival, Firefly excitedly pounced on him and hugged him. Firefly hasn't talked to Hugo much this week, so Firefly wants a hug, considering that Dumbledore, as the recognized headmaster of the school, could mobilize all the portraits in the castle as his eyes and ears. Even if he was busy and wouldn't stare at the surveillance screen like a security guard, some necessary precautions still had to be taken. For example, in most areas of the castle, the ship girls would not salute, nor would they call Hugo Admiral or Commander. "Okay, hug." After hugging Firefly and exchanging cheek kisses, Hugo took a step back and looked at the two ship girls curiously. "By the way, what did you call me here for today?" As Hugo spoke, a worm-eaten troll stopped beating the ballet teacher and turned to stare at them. "We think you should exercise your body properly, otherwise, Even if you have a sufficient physical foundation, you can only exert up to 13% of your body's potential, Veneto said with a serious face. Of course, if you don't want to, then forget it. We will definitely not force you. After Veneto finished speaking, Firefly also nodded earnestly on the side to show her support for Veneto's boss-like view. As a ship girl, she supported all methods that could make her admiral stronger. Your suggestion is excellent. I'll leave the exercise to you from now on. After listening to Veneto's suggestion, Hugo nodded in agreement. Not to mention that as an adult, he knew the importance of keeping his body in good shape, but just to save his life in future wars, he had to exercise well. Don't think that wizards just release magic at each other when they fight, but physical fitness and footwork are also extremely important. Except for top wizards of Dumbledore's or Voldemort's level who can calmly stand their ground and output magic to kill the enemy, most wizards often need to dodge when facing hostile magic, especially when facing a spell that you don't understand or can't block at all. Dodging seems more reasonable than trying to resist it with magic. After all, spells that can't hit are unlikely to cause any damage, even if they hide a wall, so having a good body is very important. If your legs and feet are not agile or you are not good at sports, it is easy for your brain and body to become uncoordinated when dodging those dangerous spells, and then be hit by those spells because of this. Very good. Next we should find a suitable sports venue, Veneto said, looking at the blank wall. Moving and running in the corridors like we usually do can't meet our requirements, so we need some more professional venues to complete those exercises, such as here. I found a good place in the library of our house's common room, then Veneto said in a low voice. Now I need to walk across this wall 3 times, concentrating on what we need. As she spoke, Veneto did as she said, walking to the window at one end of the blank wall, turning back, and then turning back at the vase as tall as a person at the other end. After 3 times, a very smooth door appeared on the wall. It should be okay, right? I don't know how wizards would understand our requirements, which purely belong to ordinary people, but now that it can be conjured, it should mean that there shouldn't be any big problems. Saying this, Veneto shrugged, then reached out and grabbed the copper handle and opened the door. After entering the room, Hugo found that this was a huge space that looked as big as a church. A small part of it was furnished with tables and chairs, some metal sports equipment that looked like it was from 100 years ago, and a row of wooden boxes. Walking forward and opening one of the boxes, Hugo found that it contained a lot of soft pads and protective gear for sports, and on the side of the room, there was a small door, which was now open, and you could see a washroom with shower facilities inside, which should be used for cleaning after exercise. Why are there such antiques here? At this time, Firefly's exclamation also came from the other side. Hugo looked in the direction of the sound and saw Firefly holding an old muzzle-loading flintlock gun in her hand. It's still a short brown Bess, which used to be the standard equipment of the British Royal Marines. Of course, I mean 150 years ago. It is not very strange that there are firearms inside Hogwarts, because according to the school history, in 1876, the caretaker Rancorous Carpe carefully arranged traps to drive away Peeves, and these traps included broken glass scattered on the corridors, as well as some traditional cold weapons such as scimitars and crossbows, as well as a shotgun and a small cannon. And what is now appearing in front of Hugo and the others is a standard 19th century shooting range and sports center. After laying soft cushions on the ground and warming up, Veneto threw a set of protective gear over. Next is the most important combat training. I think you should have mastered how to fight when you obtain that avatar. But there is still a certain distance between this mastery and actual combat, and sparring is the best way to make up for this. Speaking of this, Veneto looked at Hugo's suddenly unsightly face, and then said, of course, in sparring, we will only use the same power as you. If that's the case, then let's begin. Hugo finally breathed a sigh of relief after hearing that Veneto would not use the ship girl's power. But thinking about it, if Veneto used her ship girl's power, there would be no way to cultivate Hugo's combat level. The next training, or rather, the one-sided beating, lasted for an afternoon. It has to be said that is the embodiment of the most advanced weapons of an era. These ship girls have combat levels far exceeding humans. Even if Veneto and Firefly suppressed their power to the same level as Lon, or even a little lower, they could easily beat Hugo. Very good, I can feel your progress. Half an hour before dinner, Veneto finally stopped practicing and nodded in satisfaction. I think you should have mastered those knowledge about fighting now, right? That's right. Now Hugo felt pain all over. So he simply lay down on the soft cushion. I can feel that those knowledge that was originally only in my mind has now been mastered almost completely. When he obtained the avatar of that non-chief admiral, Hugo also obtained a series of memories about combat. However, having knowledge in this area in your mind and actually being good at combat are two completely different things. But now, through this kind of practice, he quickly mastered his power. Now it seems that the training on firearms can only be put off until next time. After raising her wrist and looking at her watch, Veneto said with a slight regret. Now let's clean up and prepare to have dinner. Chapter 36 The difference between wizards and muggles. After the exercise, Hugo simply took a shower in the nearby washroom, followed by two ship girls giving him a full-body massage to relieve the pain from the battle. It has to be said that the ship girls are good at everything related to battle, including post-battle recovery. After only a dozen minutes of massage, the pain in his body had disappeared. Actually, as an admiral, you are already on the path to slowly surpassing humans. Especially after you chose the first avatar to strengthen yourself, this evolution speed has greatly accelerated, Veneto said while massaging Hugo's back. Otherwise, even if we tried to avoid your vital points, you wouldn't be able to recover so quickly. If you can control this strength, why did you hit so hard? Lawrence muttered with a bitter face. He felt pain all over his body now. That's to make you remember, Admiral, Firefly said from the side. Because only pain can make you quickly learn how to fight and how to avoid those fatal attacks. Thinking about the ultimate state of the Admiral displayed when the system was activated before, being able to withstand a nuclear explosion at almost point-blank range with only a change of clothes, flying to the moon with his bare body, and then breaking through the atmosphere and returning to Earth in the same posture. Compared to these, the current level of recovery ability can only be said to be the most basic. In the following time, Hugo entered a normal learning state. The only difference compared to others was that after becoming familiar with the Weasley twins, he began to take a few hours every Saturday to develop various joke products together. Of course, because Hugo is only a first-year student now, even if he learns at a speed more than 10 or even 20 times faster than normal people through a lot of reading and asking questions to the teachers, and then transmits these things to the Admiral network, he still has a huge difference in magic level compared to people like the Weasley twins who have been exposed to magical education since childhood. Because he has been learning magic for too short a time. Fortunately, Hugo's spellcasting level is not important in their cooperation for the time being. For the Weasley twins, the endless stream of whimsical ideas in his mind is the important cornerstone of the cooperation between the two parties. After all, compared to the Weasley twins who lived in the magical world of the 80s and 90s, Hugo, who had access to a large amount of various information through the internet in later generations, was definitely much stronger in terms of creativity than the Weasley twins, who relied solely on their brains to think, and these ideas that gathered countless people's creativity were the most valuable wealth in the cooperation. Time passed day by day, and Hugo also saw the Slytherin first-year students in herbology class. In contact, he could see that these pure-blood family-born little wizards had a kind of contempt for Muggle-born wizards from the bottom of their hearts. For example, when Hermione answered a question and added points to Ravenclaw, several Slytherin students secretly rolled their eyes, including that Malfoy with light blonde hair. Fortunately, the two sides only had contact in this class in the first year, and the relationship between Ravenclaw and Slytherin was not very good, but not as tense as the relationship between Gryffindor and Slytherin. So everyone didn't have much conflict because of this. One Monday about a month after the start of school, Hugo saw a group of people gathered by the notice board when he returned to the common room after dinner to get a book. After he squeezed in, he found that a notice had been newly posted on the notice board, indicating that starting from Thursday, they would have flying lessons together with the Hufflepuff students. Flying, Veneto looked at the content on the notice with a look of embarrassment. After all, she was not an aircraft carrier ship girl who flies around in airplanes all day long, so she really didn't have much confidence in this thing. Many of the little wizards from wizarding families were willing to boast about their thrilling experiences of flying on brooms before or after seeing this notice. For example, Malfoy complained loudly during dinner that first-year students were not qualified to participate in the Quidditch team, and then boasted about various thrilling things encountered during flying, quickly ascended close to the helicopter after encountering it, avoiding colliding with the helicopter. Listening to Malfoy's boasting until the end, Hugo and Hermione looked at each other. How do you think he avoided being sliced into sashimi by the helicopter's propeller? After waiting for a few seconds, Hermione first asked the doubts in her heart. Or are these little wizards from wizarding families not clear about the ordinary people's world at all, so that they can't even boast? Well, obviously, Hermione was more inclined to believe that Malfoy had been boasting all along. Because recently, when Hugo and the Weasley twins exchanged various opinions, she and Veneto would occasionally go over to take a look. So Hermione also had a preliminary understanding of the wizards' level of understanding of the muggles in their eyes. Unfortunately, even the Weasley family, who are recognized as the most pro-muggle in the British wizarding world, still have great defects in their knowledge of the ordinary people's world, so that they often get many common-sense problems wrong. Then the Malfoy family, who themselves look down on ordinary people, is even more. Needless to say, Hugo and Hermione agreed that Malfoy probably heard the term helicopter from somewhere, and then thought it was a kind of flying transportation tool made by ordinary people who don't know magic. As for what this kind of transportation tool looks like and how it flies, it doesn't matter to him at all. That's why such a low-level joke was made. In the next few days, a tense atmosphere permeated among the first-year students. For example, Hermione had been reading a book borrowed from the library called Quidditch Through the Ages, and from time to time recited some of the contents on the book about how to guide flying to Hugo. "Okay, my dear sister, relax." When eating breakfast on Thursday morning, Hugo, who felt that he couldn't bear it anymore, said to Hermione, "This is like when we learned to ride a bicycle back then. The core is practical operation, and learning these things in practice. Just looking at these theoretical things is actually not very useful." Okay, I'll keep quiet. The past 10 years of living together made Hermione understand what Lawrence wanted to express as soon as she heard his words, and at the same time she didn't need to hide her true self in front of Hugo. "I just did that because I was nervous." The flying lesson for Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw was placed in the afternoon. When they went to class, the news that Neville had broken his wrist in the morning flying lesson also spread throughout the school, which further deepened the tension among the first-year students in these two colleges who had not yet learned to fly. Therefore, when they went to flying class in the afternoon, many students, especially the Hufflepuff students, subconsciously stayed away from the flying brooms placed on the grass, for fear that the next person to break a bone would be themselves. The person teaching them was also Madame Hooch, the flying class professor. She had short gray hair, and her eyes were yellow, like an eagle's eyes. "All right, what are you all waiting for?" She looked at everyone's shrinking appearance and said sternly, "You will definitely not have any accidents if you operate the broom correctly according to the instructions. Now listen to my orders and stand by the broom." Hugo looked at these antique-level brooms whose handles had been touched so much by countless senior students that they were shiny, and some branches poked out haphazardly. He was a little worried that this thing would fall apart in the air. "Extend your right hand and place it above the broom handle," Madame Hooch shouted in front, "and then say, 'Up, up.'" Hugo and all the students here shouted together. Chapter 37037 Shooting Practice. Not every time traveler is a skilled flyer. Hugo, at least, wasn't. After shouting, his broom lazily rolled around on the grass like a stubborn dog. Fortunately, after repeating the command 3 or 4 times, the broom finally gave him face and jumped into his hand. Next, Madame Hooch demonstrated how to mount a broom without sliding off head first. She walked up and down the line, correcting their hand grips while reassuring some of the students who looked very nervous for her. Comforting people wasn't her forte, but the students' current state forced her to do it. Although Neville's incident that morning was just an accident and didn't cause much harm, these students, most of whom were experiencing flying for the first time, were quite frightened by the little mishap. If she couldn't calm everyone down, the probability of a repeat performance in the afternoon wasn't small. Fortunately, with extra attention, nothing major happened during the afternoon's lessons. Hugo and the other students successfully completed the course. However, because it was the first lesson, they only learned to mount the broom, take off, land, and slowly fly around the field at a height of about 1 story above the ground. In reality, that's what the first flying lesson should cover. As for flying like Harry, diving 50 feet and then pulling up, that was actually far beyond the standard, something at least 2/3 of adult wizards couldn't do by dinner. The details of the morning's flying lesson had spread throughout the entire school. Even at the Ravenclaw table, Hugo heard many students marveling at Harry's talent. Although some people in the school could perform such dangerous maneuvers, doing it on the first try with a broom was indeed remarkable. For humans, Harry's Quidditch talent is indeed quite good, Veneto whispered in Hugo's ear, listening to the surrounding discussions about Harry's flying talent. But for us ship girls, every aircraft carrier or light aircraft carrier ship girl can easily do that on their first try with a broom. What about you? Hugo asked curiously. It didn't surprise him that the ship girls who served as the main air power could do that, But he wanted to know how other ship girls fared in this regard. Ship girls like us who don't play with airplanes certainly can't perform all sorts of fancy tricks in the sky as soon as we touch a broom, Veneto frankly admitted her shortcomings. But our reaction speed and physical talent allow us to easily surpass human levels with just a little training. By the way, tonight I'm planning to start our first shooting activity, Veneto said, turning to Hugo as if she had just thought of something after finishing the plate of tuna pasta in front of her. Tonight, Hugo's eyes widened with excitement. When they were exercising on the first day, Veneto and the others said they would teach Hugo how to use firearms. Unfortunately, the previous few times had been spent training on how to hold a gun correctly, how to use firearms safely, and practicing with inert training rounds that couldn't be fired. He hadn't been able to fire any real bullets at all, so, upon hearing that he could shoot live ammunition tonight, Hugo immediately became excited, especially since he was a military enthusiast in his previous life but had never used firearms due to legal reasons. The prospect of shooting with real firearms tonight instantly thrilled him, to the point that all his attention was focused on it. The reason for choosing to practice shooting during curfew hours instead of during regular weekend exercise was that, unlike public physical training, shooting training needed to be conducted secretly, away from others. Therefore, they could only choose the inconspicuous evening hours after finishing his homework in the library as quickly as possible. Hugo and Veneto ran back to the common room together to study the theoretical knowledge of firearm use for one last round. When the clock struck 9:30 p.m., the two stood up from the sofa and walked out of the common room. At this time, there were still many people active in the common room, but they turned a blind eye to Hugo and Veneto's obvious intention to sneak out for a night stroll at this hour. For the Ravenclaw students, going out for a night stroll could be considered a routine operation. As long as they didn't get caught, everyone felt it didn't matter. After all, the students in Ravenclaw were, from various perspectives, the kind of people who were relatively self-centered, so they knew not to interfere in other people's affairs and to leave enough space for others. Originally, the two had planned to leave at 8 o'clock, but unexpectedly, they ran into Hermione, who had just returned from studying in the library and happened to see the note Veneto had left in the dormitory. As a result, she blocked the two guys who were preparing to sneak out with a menacing aura. As for why they left that note, it was simple. Hugo and the others were worried that if Hermione saw her roommate staying out all night while she was sleeping, she might report it to the professor out of concern. But they didn't expect that because the two of them returned early. Hermione felt bored staying alone in the library and came back early, saw the note, and then blocked them. Fortunately, Veneto only mentioned that she was going for a night stroll to avoid Hermione's excessive worry, without saying anything about Hugo himself. So, after spending some time, she successfully persuaded Hermione, but in this way, their departure time was greatly delayed. It wasn't until 9:30 p.m., when Hermione went upstairs to return to the dormitory to sleep, that they smoothly left the common room and headed towards the room of requirement. There were still half an hour left before curfew, and all the lights in the corridor were on. However, because it wasn't early, there weren't many students active on the road, let alone at the entrance of the room of requirement, which was already very remote, so they entered the room of requirement very smoothly. Considering your acceptance ability, tonight I will teach you how to shoot 3 types of firearms. After entering the room of requirement, which had turned into a shooting range, Veneto placed 3 firearms on the table that Hugo had practiced with for a long time in the past few days: Beretta M1934 pistol, Carcano M1891, 1938 rifle. Veneto said, pointing to these firearms that Hugo had been dry firing for quite a while. These guns are better than, or at least on par with, their British counterparts. As for the machine gun, we'll have to borrow Firefly's Bren gun on Friday, Veneto said, spreading her hands. Although I hate to admit it, our Italian light machine guns during World War II were really too bad, far inferior to the British Bren gun. Actually, practicing with 3 types of guns tonight is already enough. Looking at the firearms in front of him and the wooden boxes stacked to the side filled with bullets, Hugo rubbed his hands excitedly. Which gun shall we start with? The pistol, Veneto said, picking up the pistol and handing it to Hugo. Because this gun is the most practical for you. In fact, the reason why we didn't choose a British pistol before is very simple. Their Webley revolver is too big and too heavy, making it inconvenient to carry and lacking concealment. You're right, Hugo said, looking at the pistol. Considering the dangerous situation in the school this year, a pistol is much more powerful than the magic he can currently cast. I should indeed practice how to fight with a pistol. Chapter 3803A Shooting Training. Under Veneto's guidance, Hugo began his firearms shooting practice. However, at the beginning, it wasn't direct shooting practice. Instead, Veneto adjusted the various target positions while assessing Hugo's level of firearm usage and maintenance after his previous practice sessions. Considering that this place was just an indoor shooting range, their practice targets were limited to 3 types: a 25-meter pistol target, a 30-meter submachine gun target, and a 50-meter rifle target. Because it was Hugo's first time practicing live fire shooting, Veneto prepared only stationary targets for him today. "Long-range shooting will have to wait until we find time later," Veneto said, looking at the farthest 50-meter rifle target with some dissatisfaction. "Once we find an opportunity, I want you to practice on a 300-meter chest target, and you have to fire the first bullet within 4 seconds, with 3 out of 5 shots hitting the bullseye." That data sounds a bit familiar, Hugo thought, a standard keyboard military expert in his past life. After searching through his memories, he realized the source of the data. Isn't that what the Japanese trained their army to do at the beginning of World War II? That's right. The Japanese soldiers in World War II were indeed as inhuman as beasts, but their individual shooting skills were truly impressive, Veneto said. "If you want to master the skill, I personally think it's more appropriate to use this most stringent individual design requirement from World War II to train you." "You're right about that," Hugo said, nodding in agreement. "I had an elder in my past life who served in the 8th Root Army's guerrilla force. He told us before he died that in the early years, the Japanese Devils veterans were very accurate shooters. They had to change locations after firing 1 or 2 shots, or they would easily be hit by the Japanese. Moreover, many infantry manuals of the Chinese army later drew on the essence of the Japanese army's manuals. So, even though I hate those invaders, we still have to absorb their strengths." Soon, Veneto adjusted the target positions in the shooting range. Then, she said to Hugo, who is ready, "Next, we will practice 1-minute chest target shooting. You have to empty 4 magazines, a total of 28 bullets, within 1 minute. Considering that you are a novice, you only need to empty 3 magazines, understood?" Hugo replied loudly, following the training requirements. Then, when Veneto pressed the button on the stopwatch and shouted "Start," he pulled the trigger. Instantly, the rapid sound of gunfire echoed throughout the room of requirement. While shooting, Hugo began to subconsciously apply the shooting knowledge brought by the unlucky fellow avatar. Fortunately, since World War II, the operation methods of automatic pistols have basically not changed much to the modern era, so this knowledge can be generally applied. Bang, bang, bang. After firing the last bullet, Hugo quickly operated the magazine release button below the pistol grip to eject the magazine. Then, he picked up a new magazine from the table, loaded it into place, and then recocked the gun to shoot again. This magazine release button position also caused the biggest difference in operation between this old-fashioned automatic pistol and modern pistols. "Time's up." Veneto didn't call a halt after Hugo had fired 3 magazines, so Hugo simply continued shooting the 4th magazine as before. Unfortunately, Veneto stopped him after he had only fired 2 bullets from this last magazine. 23 shots fired, 2 misses. As a ship girl, Veneto could naturally see the situation on the pistol target 25 meters away. The remaining 21 shots were pretty good. Except for the first few shots that hit the 4 and 5 rings, the remaining dozen or so shots all hide above the 8 ring. For someone who's touching a gun for the first time, that's already very good. As ship girls, they basically don't lie, especially when facing their admiral. So, what Veneto was saying now was from the bottom of her heart. She knew that Hugo had previously obtained the unlucky fellow avatar and mastered shooting skills, but unlike some knowledge-based skills, this kind of practical skill, if not practiced, is actually not much different from not mastering it at all. So, she felt that Hugo's current shooting level was already very good for his foundation, and she could even vaguely see that Hugo seemed to have some talent in shooting. Then, "Should we continue practicing next?" Hugo asked. "I feel like I still have a lot of room for improvement in this area." "Of course, you should definitely continue practicing. Especially considering that even though wizards use magic, many spells are those ray-like spells that need to be aimed beforehand. So, practicing shooting is a very practical skill from any point of view." As Veneto spoke, she replaced the target paper on the target and then let Hugo continue shooting. However, this time, the shooting was no longer the rapid shooting of a test, but started to correct some problems in the shooting under Veneto's guidance. Accurately speaking, these problems were not really problems. It's just that the shooting movements that Hugo remembered from the unlucky fellow Avatar were more suitable for tall and strong young men, but sometimes they were a bit unsuitable for his current 11-year-old body, even though he now possessed the strong physical fitness of an adult male after obtaining the unlucky fellow Avatar. So, now he could only temporarily learn Venato's shooting method that was suitable for his current body type, even if some of the movements didn't look very appropriate when he did them. But to be fair, these instructions could be said to have hit the nail on the head, and they had an immediate effect. After just over an hour of practice, Hugo was able to empty 4 magazines within the specified time, and all the bullets hit above the 8 ring, with more than 13 hitting the bullseye. Very good. When your right hand is proficient in the future, we can practice your left hand, Venato said, massaging Hugo's shoulders. When you fight in the future, you can use your right hand for the wand and your left hand for the pistol, ambidextrously. Wouldn't using a pistol when fighting wizards seem out of place? Hugo asked, somewhat confused. And most importantly, if guns were really useful, why didn't so many Muggle-born wizards use them before? Guns are indeed not very useful for those higher-level wizards, Venato said after thinking for a moment. But if you consider that the Ministry of Magic has a large group of useless people who can't even cast the shield charm, you'll know that firearms are definitely not completely useless. As for why firearms are not popular here, it's very simple. First of all, with the UK's gun control laws, Muggle-born wizards find it difficult to obtain guns through illegal channels. And using magic to obtain them illegally will be dealt with by the Ministry of Magic. Secondly, even Muggle-born wizards, after learning magic for 7 years during the important period of shaping their worldview from 11 to 17 years old, their thinking will lean towards the magical world and will subconsciously despise the things of ordinary people who don't know magic. They may not think of using guns. Finally, in the last war, the pure-blood Death Eaters would definitely not be as clumsy as the Ministry of Magic staff, who can't even use the most basic self-defense magic, let alone have a large pile of magical items for defense on their bodies. So, even if those Muggle-born wizards had guns, they wouldn't be of much use after encountering them. After synthesizing the above reasons, it's understandable that they don't use guns, Venato concluded. However, considering that we ship girls have a way to add some kind of extraordinary attribute to the bullets in the future that is effective against wizards, it's still very worthwhile for you to practice guns. Chapter 39 Unexpected Events. After finishing the most important pistol training of the current stage and resting for a while, Hugo began training with rifles and submachine guns. Perhaps because he was slowly becoming familiar with the use of firearms, he would chat with Venato during breaks after each round of shooting. As for the content of the chats, it naturally revolved around some complaints stemming from the weapons used in the shooting that day. Why are all the infantry weapons designed by you Italians, except for pistols, so strange? For example, the Carcano rifle not only has a bizarre caliber but also likes to use those end-block clips that are particularly prone to all sorts of problems in the field. And why, when it comes to 9mm pistol rounds, do your pistols use .380 ACP rounds while your submachine guns use the non-interchangeable 9mm Parabellum? Heaven knows what those designers were thinking. Venato was also speechless at the magical brains of those Italian firearms designers. Actually, these guns are still okay. Our light machine guns are truly terrible, said to be the worst light machine guns of World War II, even inferior to the Japanese Nambu machine gun. In this cheerful environment of exchanging various interesting or bizarre stories, time passed by minute. Just as Hugo was trying to quickly empty a submachine gun magazine using a hip-firing stance, Venato called out to him. "Alright, after checking the targets this time, we should pack up and go back." "Okay, I understand," Hugo said, pulling the bolt to ensure the weapon was safe before placing the submachine gun on the table. Then, he turned his head and asked, "By the way, what time is it now?" 11:20 p.m. Venato said, putting the gun and spent cartridges into her ship equipment space. "We need to hurry. Honestly, I don't want to hear your sisters nagging." Hugo took a shower that lasted more than 10 minutes. Putting aside the fact that he had been sweating from the shooting, the gunpowder smell left on his body after firing so many bullets was now a bit pungent, and if he didn't wash it off, it would definitely arouse suspicion. It must be said that many things in the wizarding world are much more effective than their Muggle counterparts due to the existence of magic. For example, the shower gel here has a very good cleaning effect. Just applying it to the body and gently rubbing it completely eliminates the gunpowder smell on his body. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of potion ingredients must have been added to this, Hugo thought as he washed his hair. I remember that Lockhart, the fraud who will be teaching at the school next year, is selling his special shampoo. I wonder how effective his shampoo is. In fact, when Hugo was buying things in Diagon Alley this year, he saw several stores selling shampoo launched by Lockhart. Because the GG advertisement claimed that it could reduce hair loss, his father, Mr. Granger, developed a strong interest in this magical shampoo, but unfortunately, he was scared off by the high price in the end. Thinking about these random things, Hugo quickly washed himself clean and changed into the clothes he had prepared beforehand. Then, he and Veneto, who had cleaned up the shooting range, walked out of the room of requirement together. It's already 11:35. We need to hurry. Veneto raised her wrist to look at her watch and then turned to Hugo. The room of requirement is good in every way, but it's too far from Ravenclaw Tower, unlike the Hufflepuff, Slytherin, and Gryffindor common rooms, which are basically inside the castle. Ravenclaw Tower is a semi-independent building connected to the castle. For defensive purposes, this ancient castle used various walls to separate many places inside, so that the defenders could rely on the complex internal structure of the building to defend after the enemy attacked. This also led to the fact that Hugo and Veneto, after coming out of the room of requirement on the 8th floor of the main part of the castle, had to take the nearest route down to the 4th floor and then climb up Ravenclaw Tower through a secret door hidden behind a tapestry on the 4th floor. Just as they went down the stairs to the 4th floor and entered the corridor, a burst of crackling footsteps suddenly came from ahead. Then, 3 dark figures rushed out of the darkness at the corner. If Veneto hadn't pulled Hugo, they might have run straight into those 2 dark figures. While Hugo was still wondering what had happened, a white shadow suddenly emerged from the wall, shouting in a shrill voice, "Aha! Caught you!" There are now 5 students out of bed, right here in the corridor outside the Charms classroom. Damn it, it's Peeves. Hugo immediately recognized the specific identity of the ghost that emerged from the wall and also remembered what happened today in the original text. In fact, he should have remembered this matter earlier, but unfortunately, the recent shooting training and high-intensity studying distracted him, so that he didn't think of this until he ran into it. Now, for the sake of reaping destiny points in the future, Hugo and Veneto abandoned the plan to escape in the opposite direction from Harry and his 3 companions, and instead chased after the backs of those 3 people. When Hugo and the others ran all the way to the end of the corridor, they saw 3 people desperately trying to push open a door. At the same time, the red-haired Ron whimpered, "We're finished. We're doomed. We're dead meat." Peeves had already disappeared from the corridor behind them at this time, but the faint footsteps coming from the distance proved that Peeves had not gone far, but was bringing Filch over here. "Enough, you guys get out of the way." Seeing this scene, Hugo stepped forward a few steps and pushed Ron, who was blocking the doorknob, to the side. At the same time, he drew his wand and tapped the lock, saying in a low voice, "Alohomora." With a click, the lock opened. They rushed in and quickly closed the door, pressing their ears against it to listen to the movement outside. Which way did they go? Peeves. They heard Filch say, "Hurry, tell me, say please, don't mess with me." Peeves. "Quick, where did they go? If you don't say please, I won't say anything to you," Peeves said in his annoying, sing-song tone. "Alright, please tell me, what words?" "Haha. I told you, if you don't say please, I won't say what words to you. Haha. Ho ha ho ha." They heard Peeves fly away quickly, with Filch cursing in anger and shame. He thought this door was locked. Harry said in a low voice, "I don't think we'll be in trouble." Saying this, he turned his head to look at Hugo, who was leaning against the door. "Thank you so much. If it weren't for you guys this time." "Don't rush to thank us yet." At this time, Hugo interrupted Harry's words. "This is the forbidden corridor on the 4th floor. We're in big trouble now." "What?" Harry turned his head in a somewhat confused manner to look in the direction Hugo was looking before, and as a result, he saw a scene like a nightmare. Chapter 43 Headed Dog. In the room where Hugo and the others were hiding, there was a gigantic dog, so large that it filled all the space from the ceiling to the floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of wickedly rolling eyes, 3 noses, and 3 drooling mouths, with saliva hanging down from its yellow teeth like sticky ropes. However, strangely, this dog did not pounce directly as everyone had imagined. Instead, it arched its back and looked at Hugo and the others warily, while making low growling noises in its throat. What's going on here?" Ron asked, trembling as he looked at the 6 large eyes flickering in the darkness. "Why isn't that big thing attacking us? It's even backing away." At this moment, Hugo noticed that the 3-headed dog in the room was nervously staring at Veneto. Obviously, Veneto, who already knew what was in the room when entering, had been on high alert to protect the Admiral, and the state of being ready to deploy her ship gear revealed a hint of dangerous aura, although Veneto, as a ship girl, usually tried to restrain her aura as much as possible to make herself appear like an ordinary human girl. Now, in this state of combat readiness, the little bit of murderous intent that leaked out made the three-headed dog feel a fatal threat from her. This was why the three-headed dog was not charging or barking, but crouching there in an extremely wary posture. Fortunately, there was basically no light in this place, so Harry and the others didn't notice this. However, to ensure that this secret was not discovered, Hugo changed the subject to, "Didn't you guys see the trapdoor under that big dog's feet? I guess it's guarding that door. Maybe as long as we don't show interest in that door, the big dog won't attack us." Okay, it seems that's really the case. After hearing Hugo's words, Harry mustered up the courage to look at the position under the big dog's feet. As a result, he indeed saw the trapdoor reinforced with metal strips, which the dog was stepping on with its left front paw. There was also a metal ring on the door to pull it open. "Then how much longer do we have to wait?" Ron asked, trembling as he stood on the side. He was currently leaning against the door of the room, facing the big dog and shivering. If it weren't for the door supporting him from behind, he probably would have collapsed on the ground by now. "I think since this big dog hasn't charged over, it means we can wait here a little longer," Hugo said, forcibly maintaining his composure. Although he believed that under Veneto's protection, the dog wouldn't cause him any harm, people would always be nervous when such a big dog was staring at you. "Don't forget that Filch is still waiting for us at the door. I don't think you want to get caught by him, do you? In that case, let's wait another 5 minutes, Veneto said to everyone present while staring intently at the three-headed dog. "I feel that this dog won't pounce for a while, you understood?" the three Gryffindor boys replied, trembling. Then, everyone held their breath and waited quietly. However, after waiting for less than 3 minutes, Ron couldn't suppress the fear in his heart and walked to the door, twisting the doorknob to open it. Then, everyone retreated from the room together. Veneto was the last to leave the room. Just as she walked backward out of the room and closed the door, there was a loud thud from inside the door, followed by the sound of claws scratching at the door. After everyone had left the room, they found that there was no one at the door. Filch must have been busy searching for them elsewhere. At this time, everyone breathed a slight sigh of relief. That was really too dangerous just now, and, thank you guys. After realizing that they had temporarily escaped the crisis, Harry gave Hugo a sincere smile and said, "I think we should hurry back to our own common room now. I wish you guys all the best." "Wish you all the best too." After a hasty greeting, Hugo and Harry waved goodbye, then ran with Veneto towards the Ravenclaw Tower. A few minutes later, just as the time reached midnight at 12 o'clock, Hugo and Veneto successfully returned to the Ravenclaw common room. On the way, they also encountered Filch, who was busy straightening the armor again. Fortunately, Veneto had a much stronger sense than normal people, so they bypassed Filch from a distance. "A big dog that can fill a room, that's really rare," Veneto said softly to Hugo after sitting down on the sofa in the corner of the Ravenclaw common room. At this time, about half of the lights in the Ravenclaw common room were still on, and some older students were still sitting there studying. Veneto's surprise was also normal. Ship girls were a special kind of life form that could contain the power of a warship in a small body. However, in non-combat states, their mental level was similar to their appearance. So, when seeing such a magical creature that she had never seen before, she would naturally have some curiosity. "This kind of thing is indeed rare," Hugo said. "If the knowledge recorded in the book Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them that I read before is correct, this three-headed dog is a magical creature native to Greece, and its number is small. It's only slightly more numerous than dragons. In addition to being huge and having strong magical defense, their claws and teeth also contain toxins that can prevent the prey's wounds from healing." After briefly chatting about what they had just seen, Hugo and Veneto said goodbye and returned to their respective dormitories. However, this didn't mean that they had ended the conversation. As soon as Hugo returned to the dormitory and lay down, he contacted the ship girls through the Admiral network. "I should have changed the plot this time, right?" After lying down, Hugo immediately asked Victory about the impact of everything he had just done. "How many destiny points did that give me?" 2.5 points. Victory's voice was transmitted to Hugo's mind through the Admiral network. "According to the first-hand information I obtained, your actions in this incident, basically replacing Hermione's role in the original text, probably only gave you 1 destiny point. The remaining 1.5 destiny points came from Venato's confrontation with the 3-headed dog and the few minutes you spent in that room. What's the principle behind this? Hugo asked, puzzled. This is clearly all change. Me replacing Hermione's position in the original story is a change, and risking my life to stay in that room for a few more minutes is also a change. They're all changes, so why are the points earned different? I'm not sure about this either, Victory said somewhat helplessly. The system's subjective initiative is really too poor. We need to explore many things ourselves, however, according to my speculation. Changing the event itself is likely to earn more destiny points than simply replacing the characters participating in the event. For example, this time you not only opened the door, but also reminded Harry that the 3-headed dog was guarding a trapdoor, making him realize where the small package taken from Gringotts went. But because this only replaced Hermione's actions, the points you earned were not as many as the points earned from the 3 minutes of confrontation with the 3-headed dog, but all of this is just speculation. We need more samples to analyze the specific situation, Victory concluded. Chapter 41 Encounter and Preparation. That evening, after listening to Victoria's analysis, Hugo realized that he might need to further approach Harry Potter. After all, the story is called Harry Potter, so if he wants to participate in the main plot as much as possible and twist the events within, the only way is to find a way to get close to the original protagonist of the story, and Hugo didn't have to wait long for this opportunity. The day after encountering the 3-headed dog, after dinner, Hugo and his friends went to the library to read and do homework as usual. Just as Venato finished her homework at top speed and ran to the bookshelf to get a book, she accidentally bumped into Harry and Ron. She saw Harry and Ron standing in the aisle in the middle of the bookshelf, walking and looking around. It seemed they weren't there to study, but to find something. Soon, Harry saw Venato holding 2 or 3 books in her arms, and then directly led Ron to Venato. Is there anything you need from me? Looking at the 2 boys standing in front of her, Venato asked as a normal girl should at this time. You two look a little familiar. I'm Harry Potter. This is my friend Ron Weasley. The black-haired, rather thin Harry introduced himself, but before he could say anything more, Hugo walked over from the other end of the aisle. Venato, have you got your books yet? I waited for so long and didn't see you. I thought something had happened to you, Hugo said as he walked towards Venato, then saw Harry and Ron. Ron, Harry, what are you doing here? You know us, Ron asked curiously. After all, most people call out Harry's name first when they see them, so Hugo's approach was rare. Of course, Hugo nodded and looked at Ron. I've been talking to your twin brothers a lot recently, so I heard about you from them. As for Harry, he just showed the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. What did Fred and George say about me? Did they say anything bad? After hearing Hugo's words, Ron immediately asked, even temporarily putting aside the purpose of his and Harry's visit. They just said they have a younger brother. Hugo shrugged. Of course, besides simply introducing Ron, the Weasley twins also complained a lot about their younger brother, but it was definitely not appropriate to say it at this time. Then Hugo held out a hand and introduced himself. I'm Hugo Granger. This is my companion, Vittorio Veneto. Nice to meet you, and thank you very much for your help last night, Harry said at this time, shaking Hugo's outstretched hand, then leaned closer and said, if it weren't for your help, Filch would have caught us, and we might have been expelled directly. It's nothing, after all, we were saving ourselves at that time, Hugo said with a smile. Helping you was just a matter of convenience, you don't have to keep it in mind. Then the 4 of them chatted quietly for a few minutes, but Mrs. Pants's approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. In this situation, the 2 sides could only say goodbye in a hurry and arrange to chat again next time. The first step of the plan has been successfully achieved. After watching Harry and Ron turn around and leave, Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral's network, next, it depends on what we should do. Meeting Harry was an unexpected thing for Hugo. He really didn't expect Harry to come and thank him for what happened last night. But thinking about it, it makes sense. With Harry's kind personality, it would be surprising if he didn't express anything after receiving help. Today's unexpected meeting is indeed a good start for Hugo. But he knows that no matter what, since he has decided to approach Harry, he must pay with sincerity. After all, Harry is a sentimental person, and if he finds out that Hugo is approaching him with ulterior motives, there will be big trouble later. Not to mention that purely from the perspective of character, both Harry and Ron are the kind of good people who can treat their friends sincerely. If you want to choose friends, they are both good options. As for the point that many fanfics in his previous life felt that Harry and Ron were a bit of a drag, Hugo didn't dare to agree. Although these two people are the kind of people who are more impulsive and sometimes stubborn, and therefore create a lot of trouble. But as friends, they are far more reliable than those gloomy guys who don't know how many things they are hiding in their hearts. By the way, why are you reading this kind of trash book? After thinking about these things, Hugo curiously looked at the books Veneto was holding in her arms. Because he unexpectedly found that one of the books Veneto was holding had a cover printed with a Lockhart portrait striking a pose. Ah, are you talking about this one? Veneto looked at the portrait of the middle-aged man with an exaggerated look on the cover of the first book, then raised her head and replied. This book is at least more realistic in its description of details, although it is a plagiarized book. The knowledge introduced inside is real. That's true. Hugo nodded and returned to the table with Veneto, then picked up the pile of books she had repeatedly retrieved before and began to check the contents of the books. These books were all related to trolls, including books like various dangerous magical creatures in European life that mentioned trolls. There were also books like Training a Troll Bodyguard that simply talked about trolls. You should know what the next plot is. After glancing at Hermione, who was studying at the other side of the table, Veneto's voice sounded in Hugo's mind through the Admiral's network. For the sake of fate points, we should participate in this matter, especially after Victorian gave that guess before. I think we can use this matter to verify it. What you said makes sense, Hugo replied through the same channel, but with your level, it shouldn't be a problem to directly kill a troll, right? Do you still need to read these books? Actually, if I go all out, it only takes one punch to kill a troll, Veneto said quite proudly. As a ship girl, her punch is equivalent to the kinetic energy of the ship's full-speed collision, so killing a troll is not difficult. But the real problem is not here. But if you want to defeat a troll at the level of a first-year student, you need to prepare well. You're right. Hearing Veneto say this, Hugo also realized the loopholes in his previous thoughts. We should make a good plan in advance. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Preparation. In the following period, Hugo was very busy. On one hand, he needed to spend a lot of time learning all kinds of knowledge far beyond what a first-year student should master, quickly enriching the knowledge reserve of the Admiral Network. On the other hand, he had to set aside some time to practice shooting, fighting, and a series of other skills at the same time, in order to cope with the troll attack during the Halloween event in the original text. They also needed to look through a large number of obscure materials, hoping to find a way that seemed reasonable for them to defeat a troll given their age and identity. The first type of task was completed very well, at least under the connection of the Admiral Network. Everyone in the network, except for Hugo himself, could be said to be making rapid progress in magic learning compared to normal people. Unfortunately, because he was only a first-year student, he could only access some textbooks and extracurricular supplementary materials for now. This also made him make finding more books his next plan. However, considering the characteristics of those books in the restricted section, he decided to look in the room of requirement next time. Theoretically speaking, when the room of requirement displays different functional rooms, there may be various books inside. For example, in the room that Harry summoned in the original text to practice defense against the dark arts, there were books such as common spells and their counters, outsmarting dark magic, and a collection of self-defense spells, which were used to learn how to fight. More importantly, according to the description, there were hundreds of books there. Considering the book harmony plan that Professor Dumbledore launched in the school after he became the headmaster, at least the books related to combat and dark magic can only be found a little bit in the restricted section now, and the quality is far inferior to the quality of those books 50 years ago. Thinking about how Voldemort made his first Horcrux during his school years, even if the book recording the knowledge of Horcruxes could be obtained from the home of a member of the brain-dead supporter group that Voldemort formed at that time, the prerequisite knowledge required to understand that kind of cutting-edge dark magic book would definitely not be simple. And those massive amounts of dark magic knowledge should be what Voldemort managed to learn in school, and the books in the room of requirement are actually the books that have been forgotten in this castle over the long years. Thinking about the number of lost books in these thousands of years, Hugo felt that he was already starting to look forward to going to the room of requirement to find these books, but the possible troll invasion incident on Halloween made Hugo temporarily unable to care about other things. As time passed, he, Veneto, and Firefly searched a lot of materials, but they didn't find much useful content among them. For example, the book Training a Troll Bodyguard pointed out that attacking the troll's head with a stunning spell or attacking the troll's eyes with an eye-blinding curse could cause serious damage to them, and if the attack strength was adjusted to a suitable level, that kind of pain could teach the trolls how to obey the wizard's orders. But this instruction has two small problems. The first is that if you want to know the specific spell strength table, you need to send an owl to the contact address printed on the last page of the book and send more than 200 galleons for to issue with the letter. First, don't consider how suspicious this kind of memory contact method would be if the trolls really caused trouble on Halloween. Just 200 galleons, he doesn't have them. On the other hand, both this stunning spell and the eye-blinding curse are definitely spells that upperclassmen have the ability to master. And Hugo's Muggle-born background and first-year student status would cause a lot of trouble if they used this spell. So even though both Veneto and Firefly said that they could learn these two spells before Halloween, he still rejected the idea of directly defeating the troll. However, the book Traveling with Trolls can be regarded as full of useful information. Just thinking about the title of the book, you can know how heavy the taste of the guy whose memory was robbed by Lockhart is. But some of the details about the special living habits of trolls are unparalleled. Even the content about trolls and fantastic beasts and where to find them is far inferior. Thinking about it, Knit's commander, the old man, has devoted his life to protecting magical creatures. But as a normal human being, he also has no love for trolls, which are brainless, destructive, and disgusting in terms of sight, smell, and touch. So the records are naturally relatively simple in the book Traveling with Trolls. The author specifically noted that from an anatomical point of view, the size of a troll's head is obviously small in proportion to its body, and this also affects the troll's brain capacity. Too small brain volume leads to obvious intellectual defects in trolls, and too small cerebellum volume leads to serious problems in trolls' body balance, making it easy to fall due to the destruction of balance. Most importantly, after accommodating the minimum brain in that size of the skull of the troll's head has to become very thin. This also makes the head of this creature the most fragile part of their body. However, even with this information, it is extremely difficult to defeat trolls while controlling the magic power level at a lower level. However, in order to figure out the rules for obtaining destiny points and summon more ship girls as soon as possible, Hugo began to prepare in the following period. In addition to working hard to learn various knowledge, skills, and preparing to fight the trolls, Hugo's biggest gain was that he and Harry slowly changed from nodding acquaintances to relatively familiar people. Although they can't be regarded as very good friends, they are also the kind of acquaintances who can say a few words to each other at ordinary times. The most obvious example is that now when Hugo and the others are studying and writing homework in the library, Harry and Ron sometimes come over to ask for some homework questions. After all, the level of the Gryffindor little wizards in academics is still slightly worse than that of Ravenclaw. Although Gryffindor students are not too willing to put too much effort into learning, they are quite serious when they are learning, Hermione said to Hugo when she returned to the common room after finishing her studies one day. After all, in terms of personality, she still has a side of being a good teacher, but because Hugo's level in all aspects is not bad, it is difficult for Hermione to find opportunities to educate others at ordinary times. This time, it can be regarded as letting her have her fill. However, according to Hugo's observation, Harry and Ron did not seem impatient because of Hermione's attitude. On the one hand, it is because Hermione is not an only child this time, so she has learned how to get along with peers when dealing with Hugo at ordinary times. Therefore, when explaining problems to Harry and Ron, there is no uncomfortable arrogance. On the other hand, because Hermione and Harry are not on the same house now, she will also pay attention to restraining her temper when facing Harry and the others. And for Harry and the others are very grateful as long as Hermione can explain those knowledge clearly. Under this situation where they are trying to tolerate each other, the Golden Trio in the original work seems to be much more harmonious when they first come into contact here. And Hugo also gained a little destiny points because of this unexpected change. In short, everything seems to be slowly getting better during this time. Chapter 43043 Halloween. In this busy state, time flew by. It wasn't until Hugo saw pumpkin lanterns with blue flames lit inside them start to float around the castle that he realized he had been at Hogwarts for 2 whole months, and Halloween was just around the corner as the holiday approached. The castle began to fill with a festive atmosphere. The most active of all were the ghosts. Some ghosts began to reenact the moment of their death, while Peeves the poltergeist would sneak into every place he could to try and scare anyone who came near him. For example, Hugo had seen Filch angrily drag Peeves out of the suits of armor lining the corridors more than once, because Peeves would not only jump out and startle people, but also utter many inappropriate words on Halloween Day. During Charms class, Hugo was the first in the class to successfully cast the levitation charm, earning 5 points for his house. What made him even happier was that Victory told him that the change in this class had earned him some fate points. "Hugo, what have you been doing with those things you've been getting from Neville from Gryffindor in Potions class these past few days?" In the afternoon, in the common room, Hermione asked, clearly puzzled, watching Hugo carefully put away several bottles filled with oddly colored liquids. "They're obviously failed potions, I know," Hugo nodded. "But these potions have some unexpected and strange effects. You should know that I've been working with the Weasley twins to develop some joke products. And some of these failures, after some modification, might become interesting joke potions. Oh, but you'd better be careful. I think some of those potions can even destroy metal cauldrons." Hermione didn't really approve of her brother mingling with the Weasley twins to research these things. After all, such research often involved danger, and Hugo seemed too young. She was worried about her brother getting hurt in the process. Watching Hermione stop paying attention to the potions he was holding and start chatting with Veneto beside her, Hugo quietly breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, what he had just said was only part of the reason. The other important reason was that these potions, without revealing those firearms, would be his most important weapons against the troll, because he realized during his previous preparations that as a human, it was impossible for him to improve his magic level as quickly as the ship girls. On the other hand, magical items that would allow a first-year student to defeat a troll were simply not something a muggle-born wizard like Hugo could get his hands on right now. As a result, after going around in circles, Hugo unexpectedly discovered that Neville's potions were actually the most lethal weapons he could get his hands on at this stage. He figured that liquids that could corrode metal might also have a considerable killing effect on trolls. Fortunately, because of their friendship from facing the three-headed dog together last time, coupled with Hugo claiming that these failed potions had some effects that could create very good prank effects, Neville didn't suspect anything else, and tried to give Hugo his failed potions after each potions class. So by Halloween, which was this morning, Hugo had 4 or 5 bottles of failed potions made by Neville. He had secretly tested the effects of these potions and found that they were indeed very lethal. After returning to the dormitory, Hugo put some of these potions into 5 or 6 test tubes, so that even if he had to explain later, he could say it was for research. This was why he didn't bring all the potions with him in bottles. After all, the bottles were too bulky and it would look too suspicious to carry them around like that. After everything was ready, it was almost time for dinner. Hugo straightened his clothes and walked with his Ravenclaw classmates towards the Great Hall. "You look a little nervous." Although Hugo disguised it well on the outside, Hermione, as a twin who had grown up with him since childhood, quickly saw the unease in his heart. "What happened?" "It's nothing," Hugo smiled and said. "It's just that it's my first time spending this kind of holiday in the magical world, so I'm a little curious. Just think, it's Halloween, and the outside world can have so many interesting things even without ghosts, and it must be very interesting to celebrate the festival in a wizarding way in this school with ghosts and magic." "You have a point," Hermione nodded with a smile. She also recalled the happy times when she and Hugo dressed up as various legendary creatures and played trick-or-treat at the neighbors' houses, asking for candy from house to house. Amidst the laughter, everyone walked into the Great Hall, only to find that the Great Hall was completely different from noon. Various places were decorated with colorful Halloween decorations. 1,000 bats fluttered on the walls and ceiling, and another 1,000, like low, dark clouds, swirled above the tables, causing the candlelight inside the pumpkins to flicker. Won't these bats get something dirty on the food? As a young witch from a family of doctors, Hermione naturally loved cleanliness. So she found it a little unacceptable that these little animals, who usually lived in cold and dirty caves, suddenly appeared here. "Don't worry, Hermione, unlike at Gryffindor, where she was often ostracized, the Ravenclaw students had a very good impression of Hermione, a little junior who loved to study and worked hard to answer questions and earn points for the house." So, just as she finished asking the question, Marietta, who was sitting diagonally opposite her, took the initiative to answer. "These bats were conjured by Professor McGonagall. They are not those dirty breeds from outside. So you don't have to worry about that at all. Just as everyone was chatting, Professor Dumbledore stood up and said a few words. Then he directly announced the start of the feast. Delicious dishes suddenly appeared on the golden plates. Just like at the opening feast, Hugo and Veneto looked at each other and then started eating, like everyone else at the table. But if anyone paid attention to them, they would notice that although they were moving a lot, they weren't eating much. After all, there might be some intense exercise later, and eating too much would be inconvenient. Of course, this inconvenience only applied to Hugo. For the ship girls, this problem simply didn't exist. The reason she didn't eat much was purely to take care of her admiral's feelings. Sure enough, just as everyone had finished their appetizers, Professor Quirrell suddenly rushed into the restaurant, his large turban askew on his head, his face full of terror. Everyone stared at him, only to see him walk to Professor Dumbledore's chair, lean against a table, gasping for breath, and say, "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." After saying that, he fell headfirst onto the floor and passed out. The restaurant was in chaos. Professor Dumbledore had to set off several ear-splitting firework explosions from the end of his wand to calm everyone down. "This guy is really going all out," Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral network. He was conscious when he fell just now, but to be able to fall straight face first to the ground like that, he's a ruthless person. Although Professor Quirrell's feigned unconsciousness had deceived many people, it couldn't fool the ship girls with their superior senses. Quirrell has no choice. After all, he has to establish a persona of being cowardly and incompetent, and being frightened unconscious by a troll escaping is a very good example of showing his incompetence, Hugo replied. As for why he landed face first, don't forget what's on the back of his head. Chapter 44 Terrible Giant Monster. Just as Hugo and Veneto were rapidly communicating through the Admiral network, Professor Dumbledore was already on stage arranging everyone's upcoming tasks. Clearly, the immediate priority was to get the students to a safe place, and then the professors would deal with the troll. But Hugo suddenly realized that all his previous plans had a fatal flaw. Unlike Gryffindor, Ravenclaw had fewer students, and the student leaders and upperclassmen were more meticulous. Sneaking away from the line like Harry and Ron in the original story was basically impossible. For example, all the Ravenclaw students were now gathered together and heading towards the Ravenclaw Tower. The upperclassmen, under the command of the prefects, were scattered at the front and rear of the group, protecting the younger students in the middle to prevent the younger students, especially the first-year students, from getting lost in the chaos. The Ravenclaw prefects had even selected several 6th and 7th year students who had performed well in defense against the dark arts class to walk on either side of the first-year student line to maintain order. How are we supposed to leave now? Veneto looked around at the situation and contacted Hugo through the Admiral network, her tone filled with dissatisfaction. "I don't think there's any way other than charging straight out. After all, ship girls weren't just soft and cute girls. As the most powerful killing machines created by humans in that era, they still had a side that loved fighting and killing in their bones." Therefore, Veneto naturally felt a little annoyed that the planned battle was about to fall through. "I think the most reasonable thing to do now is to follow the group back to Ravenclaw Tower," Hugo decided decisively after a few seconds of simple thought. "It would be too strange to force our way out of the group at this time. I don't want to be seen as a dangerous element." Anyway, Harry and his friends encountered the troll in the original story because of the conflict in this morning's charms class. But now, because of our intervention, they haven't even had a conflict, let alone said a word to each other during the class. So I think we've achieved our goal in terms of changing the plot. Saying this, Hugo looked at Veneto, whose face wasn't looking too good, and then comforted her through the Admiral network. "I know you must be feeling a little uncomfortable that you couldn't fight this time, but think about the original plot. We'll have plenty of battles to fight later. It's okay. It's enough to be with you, Commander. It doesn't matter whether I can participate in the battle or not." As the last word disappeared from Hugo's mind, Veneto grabbed Hugo's hand and turned to give him a bright smile. "Besides, I've been very happy preparing for battle with you during this time." Veneto wasn't just trying to appease Hugo. For ship girls like them, being with the Admiral was a very happy thing. As for other things, they were just minor matters. Why would a troll appear here? Just as Hugo and Veneto finished their communication, Hermione, who was next to them, glanced at their joined hands and asked curiously, "If I remember correctly, the book says that these creatures are very stupid. It shouldn't be possible for them to open a cage door, right?" "I think it's possible that the professor forgot to close the cage door." Cho Chang, a second-year student walking in front, turned her head and said before Hugo could answer, Although I don't think it's appropriate to evaluate the professor in private, such a low-level mistake seems like something our current defense against the dark arts professor would do. My mother wrote to me a few days ago and told me that Professor Quirrell passed the NEWT exams with almost all O's a few years ago, and then said he was going to travel around to broaden his horizons. Marietta revealed some inside information at this time. But I don't know why he became like this after returning from his trip. Is this kind of situation normal? As they walked up a flight of stairs, Hermione asked curiously, I mean, is it common for someone to suddenly have a complete change in personality like that in the wizarding world? How could that kind of thing be common? Marietta was very pleased that her junior was asking her questions, so she answered very seriously. But it's not without precedent. For example, there's an employee in the Department of Magical Games and Sports at the Ministry of Magic named Bertha Jorkins. She suddenly became mentally unstable back then. Just as everyone was whispering to each other and walking through a long corridor towards Ravenclaw Tower, Veneto suddenly grabbed Hugo's hand and warned him through the Admiral network, the ground is shaking. It seems like a big guy is approaching. Before she could finish speaking, a tapestry a few meters away from them was suddenly lifted, and a smell that combined the stench of dirty socks and a public toilet that had never been cleaned instantly filled the entire corridor. At the same time, a behemoth burst out of a secret passage behind the tapestry under the illumination of the corridor lights. The first thing Hugo saw was a flat, rough, calloused foot. Next were thick, tree trunk-like legs, a body like a huge pile of mud and gravel, and a small head that didn't match the size of the body at all, about the size of an adult's head, which looked quite comical. But what was dangerous was that the troll was holding a thick wooden club in its hand. Because its arms were very long, it was dragging the club on the ground. Hugo now finally understood why Quirrell was so proud of being able to subdue the troll with special methods in the original story, and even boasted about it to Harry at that crucial moment of stealing the Philosopher's Stone. Because the size and strength of this guy alone looked dangerous enough, and even adult wizards might not be able to deal with it. At least the wizards at the Ministry of Magic, who couldn't even cast a shield charm, certainly couldn't do it. The troll, who had just rushed out, staggered forward and almost fell because the secret passage led directly from the second floor to the underground classroom. The entrances on both sides, whether viewed from the inside or the outside, were hidden by illusion magic and looked like dead ends filled with bricks, so the troll, who had intended to smash through the wall and rush out, overshot its mark. The Ravenclaw group instantly fell into chaos. Because no one had expected that the troll could suddenly attack the middle of the group of younger wizards with minimal noise. The only thing to be thankful for was that the corridor was very wide and the Ravenclaw group was on the other side of the corridor, so the students were temporarily unharmed except for being frightened. But the students' good luck ended there. The troll quickly recovered from the dizziness caused by overexertion and raised the club in its hand and walked towards the Ravenclaw younger students. Some of the upperclassmen who had been assigned here began to organize the younger students to retreat, while others drew their wands and tried to fight back. But it was obvious that their magic only caused the troll a little pain, and not only did it not cause effective damage, but it also angered the troll, causing it to charge directly towards the place with more people. Chapter 45. Just positive. For some reason, the troll was charging directly towards where Hugo and the others were. As soon as Hugo saw the troll charging, he immediately followed the instructions of Penelope, who had been assigned to them, and ran quickly to the other end of the corridor, grabbing Hermione and his housemate Michael Corner along with Venetora. Perhaps due to the magical attacks, the enraged troll swung the wooden club in its hand, smashing the armor placed on the side of the corridor, and then smashing the tapestry hanging on the wall. Fragments of broken bricks and torn tapestries flew in all directions, some even hitting the fleeing students. Fortunately, the momentary stiffness of the troll when it rushed out gave the Ravenclaw students a precious escape time, so at first, the troll didn't find any students to attack. And for everyone, as long as they ran a little further, there would be a narrow secret passage and a broom closet, and they could guarantee their safety by squeezing in. However, at this moment, an accident happened. Hugo heard the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground behind him. Turning his head slightly, he saw a girl with long black hair fall to the ground, and behind her was the approaching troll. This girl probably tripped over the uneven ground of the ancient castle while running. This was not surprising for people fleeing in panic, but with a troll chasing behind, this small mistake could be fatal. Seeing this, Penelope, who had been with Hugo and the others, immediately rushed over to try to help the girl up. But the girl may have injured her leg when she fell. and she couldn't stand up and walk at all. As the troll got closer and closer, both girls panicked. Although their brains kept reminding them to run away, they found that their legs were too weak to obey their brains, and they couldn't even stand up. Save her. Seeing the troll quickly approaching the two girls and raising the club in its hand, Hugo immediately made a decision and issued an order to Venator through the Admiral network. Then, he raised a wand he had been holding in his right hand and pointed it at the wooden club. The troll was about to swing down, chanting, Wingardium Leviosa. Just as Hugo made the decision, the troll arrived next to the two girls and raised its arm, lifting the club in its hand high. Seeing this, Penelope subconsciously hugged the black-haired younger student tightly and screamed, waiting for death to arrive. However, after waiting for several seconds, the two girls didn't feel the expected pain, only a fishy, foul wind blowing past their faces. When Penelope opened her eyes again, she found that the wooden club that was about to hit them was now floating in the air. And the troll was trying to reach out and grab the club. Just as the troll was about to grasp the club, Hugo withdrew the magic he had cast on it. The club trembled slightly in the air before falling straight down. Seeing this, the troll quickly bent down and changed its raised arm to horizontal grab, trying to catch the falling club, but because of its slow reaction, it could only watch helplessly as the club fell straight down in front of its chest. However, just as the club fell diagonally to the troll's knee height, a small, white hand suddenly reached out from the side and grabbed the club. It turned out that Venator had taken advantage of these few seconds to rush in front of the troll, and then, amidst the exclamations of the students on the field, grabbed the club that was about to hit the two girls. Vittorio, Penelope, who had just raised her head to check the surrounding situation, called out Venator's surname with a sense of relief after surviving a disaster, but soon her voice suddenly became sharp. Be careful, huh? Seeing the troll bend down and clap its hands towards her, seemingly wanting to smash herself and the two girls on the ground into meat paste, Venator not only didn't retreat, but directly leaned forward in a bow step, approaching the troll, and at the same time swung the club in her hand in a full circle, smashing it towards the troll's right knee. Bang! Crack! After a loud impact, the entire club broke into two sections in the collision. At the same time, the troll's knee, which had been in contact with the club, also made a sound like a branch breaking, and then the troll's entire right leg bent backward at a strange angle around the knee joint, like the legs of those reverse-jointed animals. In an instant, the troll's right leg completely lost its balance and fell to the side and back. Its ugly face was completely twisted into a ball due to pain, and it let out a huge howl. Taking advantage of the troll's temporary inability to care about the two girls lying on the ground, Hugo, who had already reached the edge of the battlefield, immediately rushed forward, grabbed the two girls by the collars behind their necks, and quickly dragged them away from the troll's attack range. At this time, Venator, in order to attract the troll's attention, quickly stepped on the troll's body and climbed upwards with both hands and feet. The troll endured the pain and tried to slap her away with one hand, but Venator easily avoided it. Under the action of gravity, the troll's huge body fell straight to the ground like this. Taking advantage of the troll's momentary daze when it fell to the ground, Venator, who had just climbed to the troll's chest, suddenly supported herself against the muscles of the troll's chest with her left hand and bounced up, then stabbed the small half of the club held in her right hand straight into the troll's eye socket from top to bottom. Just as she waved her hand and stabbed down, that section of the club turned into a steel spike with a gray metallic luster. A scream even louder than before came from the troll's mouth, and then it rolled around on the ground, while waving its hands wildly. Let's go, Venator shouted beside Hugo at this time, while helping him pull the two girls backwards. After completing the attack, Venator avoided the troll's dying blow with a not-so-elegant lazy donkey roll, and then came to Hugo's side to help him retreat with his classmates. When the two of them pulled their classmates to a safe place, the troll also stopped struggling and lay motionless on the ground with its limbs spread out. And the fatal wound was Venator's final blow to the troll's head. Hugo saw that the eye socket of the troll's left eye was stuck with a club that had just turned into a steel spike. Based on the length of the steel spike he had just seen, the length of the part now exposed outside the troll's body, and the angle of the steel spike, this steel spike should have completely penetrated the troll's brain and damaged the brainstem, which is why this tenacious troll died in just a few seconds. Crack! At this moment, the transfiguration spell cast on that half of the club completely. The steel spike, which was originally only a little thicker than a thumb, immediately reverted to a wooden club as thick as an adult male's thigh, squeezing open the troll's head in an instant. Scarlet blood mixed with white brain matter gushed out, slowly flowing down along the troll's head. "What did you guys just do?" Victory's surprised voice sounded in Hugo and Venatora's minds at the same time. "I saw the destiny points suddenly increase by 3.5 points, which is far beyond my estimate. I think we..." Hugo hadn't had time to answer Victory's words when he heard a burst of loud and rapid footsteps suddenly coming from behind him. Chapter 46 ending. Oh, heavens, what on earth happened here? Professor Flitwick was the first to rush over, squeezing through the crowd and witnessing an unbelievable scene: walls riddled with holes, students in shock, and a troll lying on the ground with its head split in two. The students he had been worried about seemed to be in good condition, except for some who were visibly shaken, but there were no serious casualties as he had imagined. This is simply a miracle. Merlin be praised. Professor Flitwick began to distrust his own eyes, even thinking he was hallucinating from excessive stress. But soon he confirmed that no one was hurt. Then he clutched his chest with both hands, leaned against the wall, and showed a relieved expression. The other professors who arrived later also couldn't believe their eyes. Even Professor Snape, who usually wore a deadpan expression, walked briskly to the troll in a manner completely out of character, then took out his wand and tapped the troll, as if to verify whether it was real or just a paper fake. "You were too reckless, children." A few minutes later, after learning what had happened from the Ravenclaw students around him, Professor Flitwick shook his head and looked at Hugo and Venetia with a serious expression. "A troll like this is not something you first-year students should be dealing with, but if we hadn't intervened, our classmates might have suffered fatal injuries," Venetia said with a smile. "Besides, neither the broom closet nor the secret passage had entrances wide enough for students to enter quickly. Therefore, for everyone's safety, someone had to face the troll directly and buy time. Most importantly, the abilities we possess allow us to do this," Hugo continued. "Since we have the ability to do it, why shouldn't we?" "Are you saying you know your abilities?" Professor Snape meaningfully swept his gaze across their faces, then stared at Venetia's burgundy eyes and asked, "Your strength? It's innate," Venetia retorted without backing down, then said to the professors, "I've been very strong since I was a child, and Mr. Granger discovered this secret when we were exercising together earlier. That's why we were able to cooperate so well in saving people just now." "Innate?" After hearing Venetia's answer, Snape asked with a distrustful tone, "Having strength is not a bad thing, but why did you hide it from everyone?" "Miss Vittorio, I suspect you might be, perhaps because of Harry's enrollment this year." Snape had been vigilant since the beginning of the term. Therefore, he was extremely suspicious of the fact that two first-year students had defeated a troll that had inexplicably appeared, especially since Venetia's previous concealment of her strength had made him wary. "Enough, Severus. Most people have secrets they don't want to reveal, and there's nothing abnormal about that," Professor Flitwick interrupted Snape before he could finish. In fact, when the term first started, Venetia, with her silver hair, red eyes, and extremely delicate appearance, had caught Flitwick's attention, because this kind of appearance was obviously not the normal appearance of a pure human. One of the main reasons Professor Flitwick was a dueling champion in his youth was because he encountered all kinds of discrimination against his bloodline when he was studying and starting his career, which forced him to use violence to solve the problem from time to time because of his experience in his youth. He seemed to see a younger version of himself when he saw Venetia. So, when Professor Snape felt that Venetia's concealment was suspicious, he immediately retorted with excitement, "All right, Severus, Filius," Professor Dumbledore said, stepping out from the group of students. "I don't think Miss Venetia did anything wrong. After all, everyone should have their own privacy. And I must say that Miss Venetia did a perfect job in this matter." Saying this, Dumbledore didn't hide his appreciation. No matter what Venetia's bloodline was or why she had hidden her strength before, her willingness to stand up and help her classmates in this situation was enough to show her kindness, and everything else was just minor details. And besides Miss Venetia, both Mr. Granger and Miss Penelope showed their courage and kindness in this incident, Professor Dumbledore said, raising his voice to the Ravenclaw students who had gathered around. "Therefore, I will add 50 points to each of them." Albus, after hearing what Professor Dumbledore said, Professor McGonagall looked at him with some dissatisfaction. "Aren't you giving them too many points? After all, they are just first-year students, and giving them points might encourage those children to engage in adventures that are too dangerous for them." Professor McGonagall's concerns were not unreasonable, at least for the Gryffindor students. The possibility of making such adventurous behaviors was not small, and it would be troublesome if something really happened. You also heard that my points just now were for these students' courage in facing the troll and their kindness in helping their classmates. It's not because they defeated the troll. After explaining to Professor McGonagall in a low voice, Professor Dumbledore straightened his back again and warned the surrounding students with a serious expression, "Although I added points to the three of them, I don't want you to learn from their actions. After all, if you don't have Miss Venetia's strength, this approach may bring you fatal harm." After giving the final warning, Dumbledore's face returned to a smile. "All right, now that the matter is over, you can now return to the Ravenclaw Tower to enjoy your Christmas dinner. I think the students from the other houses should be enjoying the dinner they just didn't finish in their house common rooms." After speaking, Professor Dumbledore and the other professors began to examine the troll, trying to find out why it was able to escape earlier. Professor Flitwick was worried that something dangerous might happen on the way, so he simply escorted the Ravenclaw students all the way back to the Ravenclaw Tower. The professor left after sending them to the Ravenclaw common room, and after Professor Flitwick left, the Ravenclaws in the common room suddenly became noisy. Although Ravenclaw students are usually quieter, it doesn't mean they can remain calm when something like this happens. Soon, Venetia became the focus of today's banquet just as Hugo was taking advantage of Venetia's distraction to hide aside and eat. Penelope and the black-haired girl he had tried to rescue earlier came over from the crowd. At this time, Hugo realized that the black-haired girl was Zhang Chu, his second-year senior. "Thank you." The two seniors bowed to Hugo at the same time to express their gratitude. After all, this was a life-saving grace. And from this moment on, Hugo also realized that he had two more acquaintances in the academy. Chapter 47 Communicate. The banquet didn't end until around 11 p.m. Staying up so late was a rare occurrence for Ravenclaw students, who usually lived very disciplined lives. However, given the events of the day, indulging a little was perfectly acceptable due to his earlier rescue. Hugo, while not the center of attention like Veneto, still attracted the gazes of many students at the banquet. And for the Ravenclaw students, besides expressing admiration for the hero, they also asked some strange questions. For example, several students came to Hugo to ask how he had performed the levitation charm earlier. After all, levitating a feather in a safe classroom was a different matter entirely from accurately casting the spell under pressure to snatch a club from a troll's hand. Hugo couldn't provide a serious answer to this question. After all, he couldn't exactly tell them that it was purely due to his special connection with the ship girls, and that no one else could replicate it. So, he could only reply that it was the result of starting to preview and practice during the summer vacation. The students believed this answer. After all, besides talent, hard work was essential to mastering magic. Since those sorted into Ravenclaw generally had decent talent, they could understand Hugo achieving his current accomplishments through hard work. Besides these admirers and those who came to thank him, Hugo spent most of the banquet listening to his sister's nagging. On one hand, Hermione was proud that her brother had displayed noble sentiments and acted heroically. On the other hand, she didn't quite approve of Hugo's risky behavior. "Hugo, while I'm proud of your actions today, it was too dangerous. You have to remember, you're just a first-year student, and your actions exceeded your capabilities," Hermione said to Hugo with lingering fear as they ate roast beef in a corner. "You don't know how worried I was when I saw you rush over there. I hope that next time you do something like this, you'll think about our parents and your sister." All right, I understand, Hermione," Hugo said, swallowing the piece of beef in his mouth. "I promise to think carefully before acting next time, and I won't worry you again." Hugo didn't show any displeasure at Hermione's nagging. After all, he knew his sister was doing it out of concern, and he enjoyed being cared for. After the banquet ended, Hugo, exhausted from the earlier adventure and then dealing with classmates at the banquet, finished washing up, greeted his roommates, climbed into bed, pulled up the covers, closed his eyes, and opened the Admiral network. "Your actions this time have allowed me to grasp a pattern," Victory's voice echoed in Hugo's mind as soon as he connected to the Admiral network. That is, when changing an event in the original story, simply replacing the original personnel yields far fewer destiny points than completely changing the event itself, as expected, Hugo said. After all, these points were called destiny points, so naturally, the greater the change to the original destiny, the more points one would obtain. If you were to stab Harry Potter to death right now, he'd probably get a 4-figure score, maybe even 5. However, considering that this world was where he and the ship girls would live in the future, and that the ship girls were naturally inclined towards kindness, and that he himself, despite having 2 lifetimes of experience, was still just an ordinary person with a bottom line, He couldn't bring himself to be as ruthless as some story protagonists. Therefore, when planning changes, Hugo still followed the path of kindness, and even when he wanted to change the plot, he would try to make it brighter rather than darker in the grand scheme of things. After discussing the analysis of how to obtain destiny points, Venato's voice rang out, "I'm very curious as to why Professor Dumbledore let me off so easily, without even questioning the abnormalities about me. It doesn't feel like something such a shrewd person would do. I think you'd better try to watch fewer HP fanfics from my memories," Hugo said somewhat helplessly. If it were Professor Dumbledore from decades ago, the one who could shout for the greater good, he would indeed be worrying. But the current headmaster, who's over 100 years old, I don't think he's that dangerous. The current Dumbledore is a person with a very high bottom line. At least he won't have too many arrangements for you, a first-year girl who just happens to have extraordinary power, Hugo explained. Judging from his conversation with Malfoy before his death in the original story, he has always cared for the students. As for relying on Snape through Harry's mother, it's also normal. Judging from Lily's final choice, Snape had gone too far down the path of the Dark Wizards back then. Even if he later repented, it doesn't mean he washed away his original sins. In this situation, it's normal for the headmaster to be wary, Hugo said, stating his analysis. Although he had been moved by the professor when he watched the movies and read the novels in his previous life, in all fairness, ordinary people would be wary of hiring even ex-convicts who had been sentenced for theft. So, facing a former terrorist like Snape, it would be normal for Dumbledore not to completely trust Snape unless he had dementia. "You're right," Hood's voice interjected. "Don't forget that you are now in Britain's only magic school, and the students inside are equivalent to the future of the British magical world. Under these circumstances, I personally believe that Headmaster Dumbledore allowing someone with a criminal record like Snape to be a teacher in the school is already an extreme act of trust. As for not continuing to question you, it's also normal. After all, although you showed extraordinary power and certain combat skills tonight, you didn't completely expose your power. So, this level of exposure, although it will make the professors aware of your specialness, is still acceptable," Hood concluded to Venato. "After all, this is the world of magic, where anything is possible. Besides, since Hogwarts can accept half-giant students and werewolf students, it's not strange for them to accept a student with great power." "Wait, Hood," Hugo immediately asked as Hood's voice trailed off, "did you just say that Venato only used a small portion of her power tonight?" Hugo had personally witnessed Venato smashing the troll's knee with a stick tonight, completely breaking the troll's leg and shattering the stick at the same time. In his opinion, that was already a great deal of power. "It seems that you, Admiral, still don't have an accurate understanding of our combat capabilities," Hood said with a smile. "This may be because we usually don't show much difference from ordinary humans in front of you." Chapter 48 Bet. After the ship girls took turns explaining, along with various videos transmitted through the Admiral network, Hugo finally understood why Hood said that Venato had only used a small portion of her power in today's battle. As the spirits of battleships, the ship girl's power is equivalent to the power of the battleships. Taking Venato as an example, the power of her full-strength strike is equivalent to pushing a 42,000-ton ship at 34 knots, which is roughly equivalent to 140,000 horsepower. Considering that all the power of that huge battleship was condensed into a human body, her current combat power can be said to far exceed the state of the warship back then. If she were to swing her fist and strike that giant troll with all her might, it is estimated that either every punch would directly pierce the troll's body, or the troll would be directly plastered against the wall, impossible to peel off. After the lecture, Hugo and the ship girls discussed why the giant troll didn't appear in the corridor on the third floor as in the original story, but instead appeared among the Ravenclaw students in the common room. The conclusion was that trolls are living things after all, so their location is unpredictable. Now that 3 new students have suddenly been added to the school, it is not strange that the troll changed its route due to some butterfly effect. According to Victory, as time goes on, these small changes will become more and more numerous, and may even gradually affect the big picture. So now everyone should be prepared. After the late-night talk, Hugo quickly fell into a dream. After all, he was already very tired after experiencing so much today. The next morning, after learning about what had happened last night, Venato suddenly became a celebrity in the school, along with Hugo and Penelope, who bravely rushed out to save people at the time. "You two should have been sorted into Gryffindor," Fred said suddenly when Hugo and the Weasley twins were studying several new joke products together. "When it comes to courage, I think very few students in our house can compare to you two. Courage is not exclusive to you Gryffindors, Hugo said, then asked casually, by the way, I heard you guys made Harry a seeker this time. How is his level? I can only tell you that his level is very good. I can't say more, George said after carefully pouring the purple potion in the pot into a beaker. Although we think Wood's approach of completely hiding Harry is stupid, we still have to keep some things secret. Understood? I can understand. Hugo stopped asking after hearing this. After all, he was a Ravenclaw student, and it was not appropriate to keep asking about this. After a few dozen seconds of silence, Fred suddenly asked, by the way, Hugo, are you planning to bet a little on the Quidditch match? Bet? Hugo raised his eyebrows. Could it be that someone is setting up bets for small events like school games? Or is there a place for sports betting in the school now? Neither. Fred shook his head and said, this matter actually originated after Harry joined our Quidditch team. We always thought Harry should be good at flying, but the Slytherin students think Harry will fall from the sky directly during the game. Then this argument slowly turned into quarrels and some friction between the two houses. Looking at the words that Fred stammered out at the end, Hugo felt that their so-called friction had probably already escalated into a fight. Judging from the relationship between Gryffindor and Slytherin, this was not impossible. You need to know that although we two houses have a tradition of friction, we will also try to control this friction to an acceptable level. Otherwise, both the angry Professor McGonagall and the insidious Professor Snape will give us enough lessons, George added at this time. So after some conflicts, some senior students from both sides made a decision through negotiations. That is, everyone directly bets on the outcome of the first game and Harry's performance. For the Wizarding world, which is completely a society of acquaintances, this kind of compromise is not unacceptable. After understanding the ins and outs of the matter, Hugo became interested in this bet. You need to know that learning skills from the ship girls requires gold galleons. But because of Hugo's background, he only has 12 galleons in total, and even with the money in the hands of the two ship girls, there are only about 30 galleons. And because of his current student status, it is difficult to get money. Therefore, he was quite interested in this bet, because now it seems that if there are no accidents, this bet may be the way for him to obtain a large amount of money from the Wizarding world in a short period of time. However, he was still a little worried about the integrity of the Slytherin side. You said, what if I win? Will the Slytherin students not give me the money? Hugo looked at the Weasley twins and asked, as far as I know, Slytherin has always been very cunning. For example, the last time Malfoy and Harry made an appointment to duel, not only did they not go, but they also ran directly to tell the professor. This time it shouldn't be, Fred said after the Weasley brothers looked at each other. After all, this time it is a duel between the two houses, and the Slytherin students have all sworn in the name of their families. Under this circumstance, they will not damage the reputation of their families for a little bit of gold coins. Yes, Fred is right. The Slytherins are indeed more cunning, but on the other hand, they will also weigh the pros and cons, George said. For example, if you want them to not abide by the rules, there must be enough benefits, and a few hundred galleons are not worth them going back on their word. After listening to the Weasley twins' explanation, Hugo was finally relieved. After all, the Weasley family is also an ancient pure-blood family, and they have dealt with those Slytherins for a long time. Therefore, their guarantee is still credible. If that's the case, I'll bet, Hugo said, took out his wallet, took out 12 galleons from it, and then thought about it and put 2 back. Anyway, you don't have to pay for food or anything in the school. I might as well just put in all the pocket money for this year. No matter what, Malfoy really screwed us over last time. In fact, Hugo originally planned to bet everything. But later, he thought that doing so was a bit too suspicious. So he took back 2 galleons. Me too, Veneto said, and also took out her wallet and took out 10 galleons. I hope you Gryffindors can be a little more reliable this time. That feeling of brushing shoulders with death when facing the 3-headed dog last time was really terrible. Thank you very much for your trust. Fred took the money and recorded it in his notebook before raising his head and saying, by the way, what do you plan to bet on? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. Meet Hagrid. Hugo and the others ultimately placed their bet on Gryffindor winning the first match and Harry catching the golden snitch, a choice that greatly excited the Weasley twins. After all, Although Gryffindor and Slytherin had a heated argument over this matter, most people only took out a few silver sickles or even bronze nuts to show their support. People like Hugo and the others who took out so many galleons were extremely rare. In their memory, only Firefly, also a first-year student, made the same choice as Hugo and the others and bet 10 galleons. The twins thought that Hugo and Veneto might have taken out so much money because they and Harry had been very embarrassed by Malfoy last time, so this time they wanted to win back some face with a bet. Besides, since they had faced death together with Harry at close range last time, they might also have a special trust and recognition of Harry. I think we should try our best to ensure that Harry wins the game this time, Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral network as they walked in the corridor after finishing today's work and saying goodbye to the Weasley twins. I never thought that we would also need to maintain the plot and prevent it from changing. This is normal, Hugo shrugged and replied. After all, specific problems need to be analyzed specifically. We can't just be so stupid and inflexible, can we? Everything was very normal in the following period. Except for the Quidditch players of each stepping up their training, no unexpected events occurred. Thus, time quietly came to November. The Scottish Highlands, where Hogwarts is located, are in the north of England, so the weather quickly became very cold. The mountains around the school were grey and covered with ice and snow, and the lake was as cold and hard as quenched steel. Every morning, the ground was covered with frost. From the windows upstairs, you could see Hagrid, wrapped in a long moleskin coat, wearing rabbit fur gloves, and huge beaver fur boots, defrosting the flying brooms on the Quidditch field. During this time, Hugo and the others also visited Hagrid at Harry's invitation. Unlike most wizards, Hagrid was very enthusiastic about wizards from Muggle backgrounds like Hugo and the others, and even invited them to taste his craftsmanship. Veneto unexpectedly became friends with this half-giant because he sincerely liked the various hard snacks Hagrid made. I have to say that although Hagrid has various problems, his nature is not bad. He is very straightforward with people he recognizes, especially in communication. You can feel that he treats students like Hugo and the others as objects that can communicate equally, and does not look down on them because of their young age. In the next few weeks, Hugo and the others visited Hagrid's hut many times. This was mainly because they were very interested in the stories Hagrid told about magical creatures and the Forbidden Forest, and hoped to hear more. Hagrid was also very happy to have these people who sincerely liked the knowledge he told come to visit. After all, as the keeper of keys and grounds of Hogwarts, Hagrid is actually a janitor like Filch. So usually not many students are willing to talk to him. Therefore, after figuring out why Hugo and the others wanted to visit him, Hagrid was happy that he had gained the recognition of others on the one hand, and on the other hand, he began to make some preparations in his spare time to ensure that he could be smoother when telling Hugo and the others about those knowledge in such a regular life. The Quidditch season began, and the first game on Saturday was Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Although the two colleges had decided to solve this trouble by betting, the gunpowder smell in the school was getting stronger and stronger. Harry was obviously a little uneasy, because as the youngest seeker in Hogwarts for a century, many people focused their attention on him. Some people told him that he would play very well, and some people told him that they would hold mattresses at that time and follow him to prevent him from falling. This made him feel a lot of pressure, so much so that he had to run to the library to avoid the rumors. After entering the library, Harry also studied with everyone under the influence of the surrounding atmosphere. However, after accompanying him here a few times, Ron felt that the library was too quiet and refused to come again in order to avoid those noisy crowds. Harry tried his best to hide in the library whenever he had time, even if he finished his homework. Seeing that Harry was a little too nervous, Hermione, who had met him at Hagrid's, simply recommended him a book called Quidditch Through the Ages. According to Hermione, sometimes reading more books can relax you. Hugo didn't think Hermione's method of relieving stress would be useful to Harry, but strangely, Harry did quiet down after getting this book, and then sat quietly on the side of Hugo and the others' table and read it. Actually, Harry is good at academics, Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral network, looking at Harry reading quietly next to him. Think about Harry's grades in the OWL's exam. Although they are not extremely excellent, they are definitely not bad. Therefore, he is not the kind of person who doesn't like to read. As you think, you're right, I neglected it. Hugo suddenly realized at this time that there were not many places in the original text describing Harry's study, so he subconsciously applied the general academic level of football team students in American high schools to Harry. But thinking about it carefully, except for Snape's potions class, Harry's score has been low due to the professor's prejudice. His performance in other courses does not seem to be very bad. For example, in some descriptions of exams in the original text, it can be seen that he is still okay in terms of academic level no matter how everyone discusses, no matter how nervous Harry. The core of the discussion is, the Quidditch match still started as scheduled. It was a Saturday morning. The weather was clear and cold. The restaurant was filled with a tempting smell of grilled sausages, and everyone was looking forward to an exciting Quidditch match, chatting happily. For example, Cho Chang began to analyze the level of the players on both sides of this game and the possible final results to every Ravenclaw student sitting at the table who was willing to listen to her. According to Marietta, she also placed a bet with the Weasley twins, Senior Zhang. Hugo asked when Cho Chang's analysis came to an end, "Can you tell us who you bet on this time?" "Slytherin," Cho Chang said. "Although I hate Slytherin very much and support Gryffindor from the bottom of my heart, according to the results of the past few years, they have always been stronger than the Gryffindor team. So, for pocket money, I still bet on Slytherin, but I will cheer for Gryffindor on the field," she said, taking out a gold and red banner from her pocket with words of encouragement for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Okay, that's also a choice. Hugo felt that he had nothing to say about her choice, but he still hoped that his senior would not bet too much money. Chapter 50. The game begins. After quickly finishing their hot breakfast, Hugo and the others bundled themselves up tightly and walked out of the hall towards the Quidditch pitch. Before leaving, however, they all went to Harry to cheer him on. "Good luck, Harry, I believe in you." As Hugo said this, he remembered that Hermione was now sorted into Ravenclaw, so some things might not happen. He then said, "At least, from a genetic standpoint, your Quidditch skills should be very good, because your father won awards in this area." "Yes, you're right. Professor McGonagall once told me that." Harry managed a smile at Hugo and the others after hearing Hugo's words, then replied, "I just hope I don't embarrass myself in this game, otherwise I'll be damaging more than just my own reputation, so you need to eat more. You know, playing a game is hard work, especially in this cold weather. If you eat too little, you might freeze on your broom." Firefly then handed Harry a sandwich filled with cheese and sausage slices. "Just drinking a little milk and cereal like you did just now definitely won't do." In the mere 2 months since the start of the school year, Firefly had won the unanimous affection of the Gryffindors, from top to bottom, thanks to her straightforward personality. It must be said that, compared to Hermione, Firefly's slightly tomboyish personality was more popular in Gryffindor. She even vaguely became the leader of the first-year students in the house. All right, boss. I'll eat," Harry said, taking the fully loaded sandwich from Firefly and starting to eat. As a ship girl with a good understanding of the human body, Firefly naturally knew that Harry needed more calories at this time, but couldn't eat too much. So the sandwich she prepared for Harry was only palm-sized, with all the calories coming from the large amount of cheese and meat inside. After eating the small sandwich in a few bites, Harry's face looked much better. Noticing the improvement, Firefly patted him on the shoulder to encourage him, and then led a group of first and second-year Gryffindor girls and Hugo and the others towards the Quidditch pitch. On the way, Firefly quickly struck up a conversation with Hugo and the Ravenclaw students. It must be said that Firefly's sunny and cheerful personality was very effective in dealing with people, especially since she was also meticulous and, as a ship girl, possessed a unique ability to recognize people's hearts. So she quickly became very friendly with these first-year students. After arriving at the stadium, both sides quickly went to their respective house areas and sat down. Harry and the other team members went to the locker room below the pitch to change into their game uniforms. "Harry, good luck." Just as Wood began to encourage everyone, Fred came over and gently patted Harry on the shoulder, followed by George, who patted his other shoulder. "The fate of our entire year is now in your hands. You must win." After seeing students from other houses, like Hugo and Veneto, having so much confidence in Harry and them, the Weasley twins impulsively bet all the pocket money they had saved over the years. However, considering the Gryffindor team's repeated defeats in the past, the twins were just gambling that Harry, who had just joined the team this year, could bring them a surprise. After all, the Slytherin team was able to win the House Cup because of their overall strength and their willingness to use dirty tricks. The skill level of their seeker could only be described as above average, not excellent. If Harry was really a genius, he should be able to beat that seeker, but after the initial rush of excitement faded, the twins had been in a state of anxiety for the past few days. After all, they regarded the money they had bet as the cornerstone of their dreams. Although winning would at least allow them to work hard for one less year, Losing would definitely take them back to square one. That's why the Weasley twins specifically went forward to encourage Harry before the game, but because they were worried that he would be under too much psychological pressure, they could only vaguely express their blessings. Harry was confused by the twins' words because he really didn't understand why his teammates would say these nonsensical things to him. But he quickly put this strange matter behind him because Wood's speech was over, and it was time for all the players to enter the playing field. The door to the locker room opened, and Harry followed Fred and George out of the locker room, then walked towards the cheering stadium, hoping his knees wouldn't buckle. After passing through the dimly lit area beneath the stands, a wide, circular arena appeared before Harry's eyes. The usually empty seats were already full, and the Gryffindor section erupted in cheers when they appeared. Madam Hooch was the referee. She stood in the center of the field, holding her flying broomstick, waiting for both teams. After both teams arrived and gathered around her, she began her routine moral admonition. Listen, I hope everyone participates in the game fairly and honestly, Madam Hooch said, her voice carrying throughout the entire stadium due to magic. Even Hugo and the others, who were sitting in the highest part of the stadium, could hear her. I believe Gryffindor should be able to participate in the game fairly and honestly, Hugo said, turning his head slightly to Hermione beside him. But Slytherin might not. I heard from Cho Chang that our house team had a game with Slytherin last year and a large number of people were injured. This is simply, Hermione opened her mouth and said half a sentence, then didn't know what to say next. Because the Slytherin students' actions were somewhat beyond the pale, and as a lady, some words were really not suitable to be uttered from her mouth. Fortunately, the game had already begun at this time, completely capturing the attention of everyone present. At the very beginning, the quaffle was in the possession of Gryffindor, but the ball was quickly intercepted by the Slytherin team captain, Marcus Flint, who launched an attack on the Gryffindor hoops. This attack looked very fierce, but fortunately, the Gryffindor captain, Wood, made a beautiful move and intercepted the ball, and the Gryffindor team launched a counterattack, and with the concerted efforts of the whole team, the red quaffle successfully flew into the Slytherin hoops. How are Firefly's preparations going? After seeing Gryffindor score the first goal, Hugo withdrew his attention from the game on the field and asked Veneto beside him through the Admiral network. Although the previous few exercises were not bad, I'm still a little nervous. I hope your action goes smoothly this time. Don't worry, my commander, Veneto, with her eyes on the field, replied. I carefully analyzed Firefly's practice before, so I believe she will definitely be able to complete this action. Not to mention that we now have a backup plan to fall back on. There shouldn't be any major problems. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.